Good evening. I'd like to call to order this Anoka-Hennepin School Board Work Session for today, June 9th, 2025. Our first order of business is to approve the board agenda. Is there a motion to approve the board agenda as presented? So moved. Thank you, Director Langenfeld. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Director DeShane. Is there any discussion? All right. Hearing none, will all those in favor say aye? Aye. Any opposed say nay. With 4 in favor and 0 opposed, the agenda is approved. So members, the next item on our agenda is item 3, the consent agenda. As normal, members can remove items for separate consideration and discussion if that's their desire. Is there a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented? So. Thank you, Director DeShane. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Director Langenfeld. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none, will all those in favor say aye? Aye. Any opposed say nay. With 4 in favor and 0 opposed, the consent agenda passes. All right, our next agenda item is item 4. For the work session, we will begin with item 4A, Special Education Program Overview, Series Part 3. Welcome Becky Brodier, Associate Superintendent Melissa Hayes, Director of Elementary Special Education and Special Education Administrators.
And Co-Chair Argo, if I may jump in as our team's coming up, a large team tonight. Just to kind of set this up, this is our third and final part in a 3-part series. Board members, if you recall, our first session in March was around just an overview of our special education programming in the district. Then in, I believe it was April, we covered special education discipline and supports. And finally tonight, an overview of our service delivery models and where all of our programs and services are provided and located in the district. So we have a large team here. So here we go.
Yeah, here we go. Thank you for having us this evening, Co-Chair Arco and DeShane. Our team is represented by a number of our special education administrators tonight that will share some information with you around our special education delivery models in Anoka-Hennepin. We are truly blessed by the professionals that you see before you today. They are exceptional at navigating difficult situations, celebrating student successes, supporting students, families, and staff every day, both at the buildings they supervise and support, as well as district-wide programs and initiatives that they support at the district office. They really truly wear many, many hats to ensure that we provide the appropriate education to each and every student in Anoka-Hennepin. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa Hayes. She will be starting her new role as Special Ed Director on July 1st. So we're excited to have her in that role, and she'll get us started.
Good evening. So before we get into the Anoka-Hennepin service delivery models, I'm just going to give us some grounding and just some of the requirements that we have previously gone through, talk about how we identify student needs and how we look at related services and how we determine federal settings. So we know that when we were here previously, back in March, we had some information that Tim Palmetier had shared with us in regards to the state and federal mandates. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So we know that we are grounded in providing the continuum of service for all of our students, and we provide that based on individual student needs, based on their individual education plan, their IEP, and we provide that in the least restrictive environment, being able to maximize their opportunities to be in the mainstream setting, and then also to be able to offer FATE for them to support students to be able to make progress. Then as we get into the federal settings next, we had discussed this back in March as well. So as a reminder, the federal settings refer to the amount of time a student spends outside of the general education classroom in a special education setting. So it's their time away from their non-handicapped peers. Then next, we identify the student needs. So this is a sample list of the types of needs where we provide special education services. So in a minute, the special education administrators who are here with me tonight, they are going to explain how we deliver those services at the various, based on students' various developmental and grade levels. So the next related services are additional services and supports and services provided by providers beyond those services provided by a special education teacher. So you can see the realm of those related service providers ranging from a speech language pathologist, which we will reference like as an SOP, up to our school nurse and audiologist. So they also provide services on top of a special education teacher. So now we will get into our different special education service delivery models. So you can see I have a team here with me tonight that I'm very happy to be able to partner with on a daily basis. And so we're going to start at the early childhood level. And Shannon Flagel is first going to share our Birth to 2 program, then she will also share our 3 to 5 program at the early childhood level.
All right, thank you, Melissa. So our early childhood program, early intervention, EIP is what it's often referred to, serves infants and toddlers birth to age 3 who have a diagnosed disability or developmental delay. As of today, and this number has grown since I did this slide, but we are currently supporting 647 families in the Anoka-Hennepin district, and that number continues to grow weekly. Early intervention is a family-centered program delivered through what we call an individual family service plan, IFSP, versus what in the schools 3 to 22 is called an IEP. Services, we provide services in what's called a naturalistic environment, and those are places where young children without delays or disabilities typically spend time. So if you think of a child birth to 3, often they might be home with a parent or caregiver, or they might be in a daycare setting or another community setting such as ECFE. And that's where our providers go in and provide those services for those families. Melissa mentioned some of the services, but services may include specialized instruction, speech and language, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and other supports that the team identifies are needed for that family to make progress. The primary goal of early intervention is to enhance outcomes for young children with developmental concerns through that early identification process, targeted support, and meaningful collaboration with families and caregivers. We are really based on serving what those families want and needs versus which is a little bit different once we get into that educational need. Our 3 to 5 program is currently serving 857 students across the Anoka-Hennepin School District who again qualify for special education services based on a diagnosed disability or developmental delay. We provide services in a variety of settings based on each individual education plan, specific needs, and those can be provided in our district preschool classrooms, private preschools, self-contained classrooms, and licensed child care centers. Early childhood special education is located throughout the district. You might see some of the programs in our Anoka-Hennepin elementary buildings, our high school buildings, some of our strip malls in the community that we have leased with, and then also we have 3 early childhood sites. We have Riverview Education Center, Blaine Early Childhood Center, and Soderberg Early Childhood Center. As we get to 25, 26, currently we have 690 students enrolled. and the evaluations keep coming and we keep growing. Typically, we place another 300 students on top of that into our early childhood special education 3 to 5 program. Just like in early intervention, we support through a multidisciplinary team to help students build that foundational skills to prepare them for success in kindergarten. Collaboration is really big with both the program I support, early intervention, as students transition from that birth to 2 program to the 3 to 5, and also on the other end, as students transition from our early childhood preschool program into kindergarten. And then I will pass it over to Jen.
All righty. Well, I'm Jen Babaraki. I'm one of the special ed administrators, and I just completed my 25th year in the district as an administrator. And I have to tell you, I'm really excited to share with you all what we do in special education at the elementary level. I'm so proud of the work that our teachers and our staff, paras, everyone does to support our kids. Over the years, we have more complex learners, and my role as a special ed administrator is to work side by side with the teachers and the staff, really with those more unique cases to ensure that our kids get what they need and are making progress. And I thought maybe I'd come to Anoka for 6, 7 years. 25 years later, I'm still here, and there's a reason for that. I love it here. All right, so we have 25 elementary schools, and we are able to offer the continuum of services to our students. And kind of like what Melissa talked about, we're able to offer setting 1 and setting 2 services to all our students. Settings means the amount of time a student is pulled out of general ed to receive that special ed instruction. So when you look here, first of all, we have, it's called the push-in model. And that is where our special ed teachers, if the IEP team has decided that those special ed services would be delivered in the general ed setting during the intervention block. Okay, so we all have different intervention blocks, whether it's during the reading block or the math block, and our teachers could go in and provide that push-in. And we cluster students from different grade level or from different classrooms so that the kids are receiving that service together in a small group. Some kids, based on their unique needs, that's too overwhelming for them and they need a less distracting environment. So we're able to provide those services in a resource room or a special ed room, okay? And we're able to provide reading and math for those students in that small group, as well as social skills or functional skills. So as you can see here, it says resource room as well as behavior resource room. And that is, we have some students who need a much higher level of service because of their social, emotional, behavioral needs. So they may need to spend more time in that special ed classroom. And so we have, when you go across the district, we have really some nice programs that are really robust in terms of the amount of services that we can provide and the different supports. And we have developed that along the way over the years, and I'm like super proud of those resources that we can provide our kids. It's an opportunity for us to build skills and for us versus going to make a placement to a center-based placement. So we really look at how can we meet the needs of our learners in those neighborhood schools if we're able to. Next slide. So if a student is demonstrating more needs and they need a more unique program, we are able to offer what we call center-based programs. Now, center-based programs are within our neighborhood schools. So we have different schools that host different center-based programs. So one of our center-based programs is called DCD, Developmental Cognitive Delay. And you can see all the schools that host that program there. We have about 288 students that access that program. That's at the elementary level. You know, and think about, we have students that are transitioning from early childhood. We have students who may be identified through the process, through I-team that may need a higher level of service. So right now, like I said, those are all those classrooms host those, or all those schools host that center-based program. Launch. That stands for Learners with Autism and Unique Challenges, and it's specifically really looking at students with autism spectrum disorders. We have about 163 students who access that program throughout the district. Now, another program that we've just started a couple of years, or last year and then this year, it's called Ready, Set, Launch. And what we learned was, when we have students in our launch program, we had some students that were higher functioning and some students who had a very different learning profile, who were, they were students that had lower expressive language skills, lower adaptive skills, so they were more vulnerable. And so there was a difference with students with average ability and who can navigate quite easily the building, whereas other students were, needed a great deal of support. So we created a program called Ready, Set, Launch, and that's just an opportunity to really dive deeper into the needs of students who present with that learning profile. We've expanded that this next year, so that's good. And you can see all all the schools that host that program. I love that program. And then the last program is the EBD for emotional behavioral disorders. And we have 5 schools that host that program and 64 students. So again, wonderful opportunities for our students right within our district boundaries. And we make sure that we meet kids where they're at. And when they build the skills and are successful, our goal is always to get our students back to their neighborhood schools. The other piece is when we look at the kids in terms of how we cluster them, we try to make sure that kids go to the middle school where their neighborhood program is. So kids still are around other students who they live near. So that's another piece too. Okay?
Thank you. Now we'll shift to Andrew and Heather.
Hi there, I'm Andrew Heidemann. I'm a special education program administrator that works with middle schools. Thank you for your time tonight. I'm going to start kind of with our least restrictive settings where we provide services to students and touch a little more on our more restrictive settings. We offer, in every middle school, we offer co-taught ELA and co-taught math. That's for students that can be in the general education classroom and receive their services for their IEP goals directly from a special education teacher when they're teaching with a general education teacher. This is our fastest growing area in middle school, and we're working on expanding it. It's something we've put a lot of time and effort in providing training for teachers annually during the summer and during the school year to try to make this more robust for our students. We also offer replacement courses in all of our middle schools. First being our essential ELA and math. In that classroom, students are actually receiving a replacement curriculum or a curriculum that's slowed down and with a lot of supplemental resources to help the students catch up to grade level in an effort to move them back into the general education setting and eventually into a co-taught setting. That is our goal. To place a student in an essential setting, we use a lot of different data points. We use our MAP testing, we use our MCA data, we use our summative assessments, we use our classroom data, and those are IEP team-driven decisions. And most of those students are have a specific learning disability in either math or reading or writing to be placed in an essential course or co-taught ELA in math. We also have some essential courses for students that have autism. We have essential communications that works on communication skills, works on behavior regulation, and those pieces. And we have essential study strategies to work on functional skills, functional academic skills, like note-taking, learning how to manage your own assignments, and those pieces, learning skills to self-advocate, pay attention in the classroom, and we have curriculums to help those students in there. And most of those students generally have other health disabilities and have been diagnosed with ADHD by a doctor, but then they have IEP services from us. We also have functional classes.
Just one second, thank you. Director Hoekman?
Thank you. If I remember right, this was going to be phased out, the essential courses. I don't know, Corey, if you want to speak to that, or?
I can speak to it briefly, and then I can ask Becky to fill in through our, and I'm looking at Director Arco too, through our meet and confer with our, boy, I can't remember the date of that now, but through our last series of town hall meetings with our union leaders, we decided to take a little more time to be planful for that and make sure that, there were some concerns from our teachers on is the readiness for that in place? So we're taking more time to make sure we have the supports in place before making that change. So I'll ask
I guess
Becky.
thank you for that.
Yeah.
So thank you for the explanation of what happens in these classes. What would be the rationale for eliminating this support?
Yeah, right now it's staying, so that course, and I think what you're hearing here is there's a level of needs, right? So for those who are functioning a little higher level, the co-taught classes are going to work for them. For those who need more support and at a different kind of pace and level of instruction, intensity-wise, the essential courses and the functional courses are meeting those needs. So I think that's maybe the
Yeah, I can
simple
add
way to
just
put it.
a little bit to that. As our special education teachers engaged in the science of reading training with Ola this year, they felt that we could address the needs of students in our essential ELA class in the general education ELA class with appropriate support. So we were making plans to ensure that we're educating students in that least restrictive environment that we've talked about. And so based on our evaluation, we felt like we were in a place that we were able to do that. Upon further review, we just need a little more time to make sure that our general ed and special education teachers all are clear about what those expectations are, that they have the tools that they need to best support students. It's not that we're removing supports, it's that they would be getting those supports in a different way.
Great. And we also have our functional core replacement courses. Those are provided to students that have the category of developmentally cognitively disordered. And those can be, we don't use a language of center-based in middle school, but we have setting 3 services. So point being that our students can come in and out of the special education setting throughout the day as needed. The last program that we offer that is replacement courses are alternative courses. Those are, excuse me, math, English, social studies, science. Those are for students that have emotional behavior disorders. We provide the general education curriculum in a smaller setting for them. So that is another replacement course we have. Now, we kind of vary across our middle schools on what setting 3 programs that are offered at each one. Both at Roosevelt Middle School and Jackson Middle School, we offer all DCD launch and EBD programs. I put the numbers of students enrolled in those programs as of this slideshow. That number does fluctuate, as we know, and we track those numbers as a leadership team and make sure that we're appropriately staffed throughout the school year. Anoka Middle School, Oakview, and Coon Rapids Middle School have both DCD and EBD setting 3 programs, and Northdale Middle School has DCD and launch setting 3 programs.
Hi, I'm Heather Johnson. I'm also one of the special ed administrators working with high schools. So as you can see, in regards to the services that we provide at high schools, so our focus is really about looking at the student throughout their high school career, but then also looking beyond high school. So what does that transition look like? So very similarly to what Andrew had shared, we also offer co-taught courses, both in math and English. That's primarily, as we talked earlier about that setting, right, those lower settings. So setting 1 and 2, if a student is receiving that level of service, they're generally receiving those content areas within the general education with a special education teacher and a general ed teacher in that co-taught. We also offer replacement functional courses. So looking at students' overall needs, sometimes they are able to participate in the general ed for some of their courses, but then they have specific needs in the functional area, so they're able to receive that. We also have resource room, so we're able for students to access if they need additional support from an academic standpoint. We also have a behavior resource room in which they can access also during any of their class times. And again, that's an IEP-driven decision for which students would be accessing that. Transition and life skills are really aligned to what are the post-secondary needs. So when we're talking about vocational, what is that work-based learning that they'll be doing? And then also a little bit different from our middle schools when we talked about setting 3 programs. At high school, we do offer a continuum of services. So all of our high schools provide both the ASD programming, which is launch, developmental cognitive delay, which is the DCD program, and then also emotional behavior disorders, so EBD programming. So those 3 programs are available at all of our high schools. The significant benefit of that is that a student is able to attend their home high school. They're attending with the peers that are from their community, from their environment, and able to be in their home high schools. And then also, as you can see, tried to lay out what those numbers look like. Again, as Andrew mentioned and others have mentioned within those programs, those enrollment numbers can fluctuate. And then also looking at regional high school, in the past year and a half, we'd really focused on trying to follow that same model to be able to provide co-taught courses. So a student can be within with their general ed peers and still receiving the services that they need that are outlined in their individual education plan. We really do focus a great deal with high school, looking at what are those post-secondary options. So even though we have this variety of options that students have, they are also able to access STEP programs, so secondary technical education program. Out at the college, they're able to access that. If a student qualifies for the PSEO, they could do those pieces. You know, there's just a variety of how that looks. A work program would be an option for a student. Again, that's also based on IEP needs, but it really is looking at what are the skills that a student currently is able to demonstrate, and what is it that the team is wanting them to be able to work towards. And so working within their programming to be able to provide that as well.
Thanks, Heather and Andrew. Got 2 more left.
Can I, sorry, before you guys go, can I,
Oh,
just
yeah.
a couple questions. Thank you for the presentation, by the way. So it looks like the co-taught model begins in the middle school and it's done in middle and high, right? Not elementary, okay. And then, so what does that, I guess, practically look like? So say there's 2 teachers in a classroom for whichever classrooms it applies to with the students that need it. Does the second teacher spend their time assisting in learning or helping a student in some other way? Or like, what does that kind of practically look like?
Yeah. So part of that is we really like, as we're looking at that model, when you walk into a classroom, I think to speak to the professional development that has been received for those that are doing co-taught sections, when you walk into that classroom, there may roughly be about 36 students in the class. What our goal is that you aren't able to tell which is the content teacher and which is the teacher that's, for special education. They're both doing teaching, they're both planning, they're looking at those different sides of it. It could be like a large group lecture, it could be small group. There's a variety of ways in which they can structure their classrooms. Sometimes it's smaller groups that students are working in, and they're both continuing to walk around and help all of the students. So from a standpoint of, could I walk in and tell, which teacher is which, our goal is that you wouldn't be able to, right? That there's a focus for both.
Okay, so then, since they kind of share responsibilities, then it sounds like, say there's a student with special education needs in a classroom that's gonna be well, I guess, maybe, let me back up. How many students with special ed needs would warrant having in a single classroom, would warrant having the co-taught model? Or does it just depend on like the severity of the need or something?
So the number of students that would specifically receive support in that section can generally be from anywhere from like 8 to 12. But Also, you could have students that are in that section that might be on an IEP, but they don't have a service in that class. So a student can randomly also be in a co-taught section as well,
A student, meaning just any student?
any student.
Okay, and then based on what you're describing, it sounds like not just the special education students benefit from the co-taught model, because they kind of share roles, so it sounds like some of their responsibilities might shift in that, or how they teach might shift a little in that they could maybe manage smaller groups better with 2 people versus otherwise. So then it kind of affects everybody in a beneficial way. Is that accurate?
Yep,
Okay.
I would agree.
Those are all my questions.
All right, thank you.
Next, we have Anne, who is here from our RTOC Setting 4 program, River Trail Learning Center.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for having me here tonight. So at River Trail Learning Center, we have 4 communities that where we service students on various needs. And in those communities, we have our Stream and Creek community, which is a K-12 environment, Creek being our K-5 environment, and Stream being our secondary. You can see there are 4 classrooms in our Creek environment, and there'll be 7 this coming year in our Stream environment, where these students' profile typically has the cognitive and communication delays. Sometimes they are primarily diagnosed the DCD, or developmental cognitive delay, and then our autism spectrum disorders that are more severe, profound. Some of those students in those areas need support with daily living skills, including toileting and sometimes eating and just basic functions. Their curriculum is focused on functional curriculum, communication, and daily living skills. The Delta community that we have within our program is also a K-12 environment. And then our students here have those social, emotional, behaviors and delays. They're typically diagnosed in the areas of autism spectrum disorder, emotional behavioral disorder, and other health disabilities. There are 13 classrooms within here, 5 elementary, 8 secondary, 4 middle school, 4 high school. Their curriculum is an alternative curriculum, so it's like an alt math, where it is that general ed curriculum with maybe a little slower pace, but it is focused on the gen ed curriculum. And then includes that instruction in self-regulation as well as social skills. And then in our 4th community, we have Rapids community, that is students diagnosed with those emotional and behavioral disorders that are more those externalizers, where you may see their behavior in a different manner. And sometimes they communicate or express themselves in ways that is more visual and externalizing. We do have 7 classrooms in that area, and this is only secondary, so we have 2 middle school classrooms and 5 high school classrooms. They also receive an alternative curriculum that is that alt science, alt social studies, alt math, alt English, so it's based on general ed curriculum at a slower pace. And then they also receive that direct instruction in self-regulation and social skills. The student need so in Stream and Creek, we have, I'll find it here in a second. Our Stream students, we are programmed for 47, our ASD students, we are programmed for 47 students in the fall, 63 that'll be receiving services under the disability of emotional and behavioral disorders. We do have 1 student that is identified DCD, the developmental cognitive delay, and we have 42 in our Stream and Creek program. One of the things that is finding that we watch trends over years, and from the year 21-22 till now, we started the year at about 120, 125 in 21-22. We are forecasted to start the year, this coming year, at 153 students. So the trend is increasing, and so as well as the needs and the staffing, so, and the need for the training and the staffing. So, thank you.
Can I ask a question? How often, or does it ever happen that someone at the River Trail Learning Center, I don't know what the right term would be, like transitions maybe out of it?
Absolutely. That is our main focus, is to return kids to their neighborhood school. And for some of our students, the students may find that their most comfortable and least restrictive setting is RTLC. They find that that is their home, they have their most success there. But some of our students are definitely hoping to go back to their neighborhood school and rejoin their peers, their same age peers. So that is one of our main focuses. And then when we get to that point where they've developed those skills, it is an IEP team-driven decision based on data to where their needs are best met. So we do have several students that will be starting in the fall for their first transition ever. Some that have been with us since, I have one student that's been with us since first grade who, as a senior, is now going to join his neighborhood school for the first time for a class, and he's super excited about it. So it does happen.
And maybe board members, this is an opportunity for me to just put in a plug. I'm proud of the district for over the years, working hard to serve our students who need setting for programming here in the district. Many metro districts utilize intermediate school districts. There's 4 of them. So that minimizes it's a cost-efficient way, so we think we can contain costs and provide stronger instruction in schools within our district versus long bus rides to other buildings that are outside our location across the metro, and do that at a more cost-effective way. So over the years, the board has invested in the programming at River Trail and really mirrored the kind of things that other districts pay much higher fees or cost to meet the requirements for education in those intermediate districts. And there's 4 of them that kind of serve the metro area, and if you go outside the metro, there's service cooperatives that do this throughout the state to meet those requirements that all districts have. So I just commend the team for continuing to find ways to do that, and we wrestle and struggle with space as we do across the district, and it's a constant evaluation of work, and we provide the programming needed and still have, Director Arco, to your point, students who are successful can have that opportunity back to their neighborhood schools, and it's a much more seamless transition than moving within school districts. So just a little comment side note there about something that's really critically important from a cost perspective, but also just a student success perspective as well. All right, thank you.
Director Langenfeld?
Just as a follow-up, we had a lot of transitioning when I was principal at Coon Rapids, and it goes to the IEP team and all of the careful support that's given. So often the student doesn't just go back to their home school. It's a slow transition, and sometimes you try a couple different ways, and because that's the goal. And we'll keep trying, and the schools work in partnership, and the principals and staff. So it's been when we brought the kids home, we called it bringing the kids home back in the day, to do that, and I think somebody's father was around at that time on the board. But it was a really important step because we weren't able to do that prior to. And you're right, Superintendent McIntyre, it was a significant cost savings as well, but it was best for kids, so. Anyway, thanks.
Thanks. And then next we have Paige Dopp. She's here from Two Rivers Transition Program at Franklin. It's our program for students ages 18 to 22.
All right, thank you for having me. So yeah, we serve our students who are 18 to 22. They are working on those transition areas, so post-secondary education and training, employment skills, and then also independent living. So we really work on providing skills or instruction for students who they have that instruction in high school, but they continue to need specialized instruction in those areas in order to meet their goals that they have for after they earn their diploma. So we have a lot of classes around like your basic academics, home living skills, adding in vocational opportunities for students to be able to experience and work on those, and then they can gradually work on working those skills in different settings. So high school teams have to refer those students to us, so it's not like, hey, this sounds like a fun program to attend. It is a referral. High school teams look at students and say, yep, they continue to need that support in order to meet their goals after they earn that diploma. Really, the focus of our program is how we can help support them to become independent in the community, in their jobs, and in their life after they turn 22 or graduate from the district. That's all.
And I'll just jump in one more time here. I know many of the board members were able to get to the graduation open house and saw the space with a real intentional effort to have a facility better designed to provide adult learning opportunities for our students. So it's a significant, a very unique, specialized facility that we should be very proud of. Give the board, this has been over the years, something that finally came to realization. It's hard to create adult living and adult learning spaces in high schools or other facilities that we've used or even leased in the past. So I commend the team for making that come to life in this first year. And you saw the full house, the full parking lot, all the families were there, a tremendous turnout, lots of pride in the program. So commend our team for that.
Yes, and thank you for those of you who came. We really appreciate that. Yeah, one other thing, so we are, anticipating enrollment for next year is 250 students. So yeah, we have a lot of students that we're able to best support and within our community, so.
Okay. Well, thank you. As we wrap up here, I want to first of all thank my special education administrative team. I want to thank them for their dedication and hard work of how they support our students with their instructional needs on a daily basis. And they collaborate with families, they collaborate with staff, they support staff, and they come up with many creative, unique ideas. So I'm very grateful to be able to work with all of them, and I'm very thankful for them to be here tonight to share their instructional models with you. And so as we look at the summer here and wrap up, we know that we're very fortunate at Anoka-Hennepin to offer a full continuum of services, and it's based on student individual needs, and it's planned in the least restrictive environment. So all these placement decisions are made by students' IEP teams. As we look at their individual plans, we always want to look at the student strengths as well as those needs, and we develop the plans based on what's best for students to ensure that they can be provided progress based on their IEP goals and objectives. And so we're very fortunate to be able to offer the variety of programs that we do have. And we're very fortunate to be able to have the partnership between general ed and special ed to support our students who need these services. So at this time, I can open up to see if there's any additional questions or comments from the board.
Board member, Director Hoekman?
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. A lot of information there. It's wonderful that we can meet the needs of such a wide variety of students. And as we look at just ensuring, especially, if I understand right, the largest number of students would be in setting 1 or 2? And so they would be
Yep, that's
working
right.
with general population, working to enhance all of their skills, get all towards graduation requirements, as we saw all those wonderful graduations and getting all those courses. We also just purchased new reading curriculum to enhance the science of reading and use that with our students. What things can we do or are being done with the special ed, especially since many of these kids haven't had the opportunity to experience the science of learning, since our teachers are just getting finished up being trained, to ensure that all of those students are getting the reading skills that they need?
So we have a couple of things. First of all, we're fortunate that our special education teachers have been able to participate in the science reading training. So they've either had letters or OLA training, and we continue to offer that to our new hires that are coming on board. We also have a great partnership between general ed and special ed, where when our students are in the general ed setting, the special education teacher at the elementary level, they do that push-in where they do collaborate with that general ed teacher to know how do we best support the students. So all the students are general ed students first, so they do receive instruction from their general ed teacher, and then the specialized instruction provider from the special education teacher is on top of that. So we provide like that additional scoop, and there is that time for collaboration, reviewing data to see how our students are making progress based on their IEP goals and objectives, but also based on how they're performing within the classroom. So it's really that collaboration effort. And then we continue to work with the state to hear about some the state recommendations for intervention ideas. That will be coming up very soon. So we'll be looking at what do we need to provide in addition to our new ELA curriculum. So we'll continue to provide enhancements to how we offer that specialized instruction for our students.
Good, just thinking, want to make certain that we're getting all those opportunities and maybe thinking outside the box and how we can ensure that so that all of our students with disabilities get that specialized instruction that are appropriate for their needs. Especially as we look forward, I know there's experiences where an IEP, in order to facilitate learning in something like science or social studies, that the structure, the breakdown sometimes gives reading supports in the classroom there. I just want to make certain that we're keeping that balance, that we're not excusing students from having those opportunities and really pushing first and foremost that the students have the ability to read. So hopefully looking at those IEPs in conjunction with their families to keep those lines of communication open so that the students are primarily getting those reading support, reading opportunities that they need to be literate adults.
Thank you.
And I would just maybe add it to kind of emphasize your point with stronger instruction, stronger core instruction at Tier 1. Hopefully, students won't need as much intervention or support through special education, so they can get their needs met through the core instruction. And so the science of reading and all those efforts that we're putting in place, our goal is maybe fewer students would need that level of help so that we can shift those resources to those who do. So that's what we're aiming for, right? And I know you saw, board members, the schedule that we're launching here to get the training going here, and that includes our special ed staff to make sure that they're getting that same training with mainly our teachers and paras, so we can deliver on that as well.
Director Langenfeld?
One more additional comment in terms of the thinking about serving special needs students. There is a lot more information and tools now that we'll be using for screening. I was on a meeting prior to coming here, and the dyslexia screening tools and things that our MDE will be providing in the training around that will be very important, to your point, so that we don't miss out a student, and also should be able to then identify exactly or close to what that student would need, as opposed to the tools that we've had in the past. So I think that will be extremely helpful.
Thank you.
Director Hoekman?
Yeah, excellent point. Just tying on that, because I know right now we haven't been able to specialize that kind of support for students, that it's been sort of general. So hopefully those screening tools will allow for us to give more specific targeted assistance to our students.
And then I have another question. So from elementary all the way through high school, there's all these different categories of special ed, like the ASD, the autism spectrum disorder, DCD, developmental cognitive delay, EBD. I think I saw SOP in there. So I guess my question is twofold. Of all of those categories and throughout all of school, what percentage of students with special education needs wind up transitioning out of all of the layers of support, kind of just back into the general, I don't know, population of students? And then of those students who, let's say, graduate from those levels of support, which categories of special ed do you see that happen the most often, or which has the highest share of that occurring?
I can't share the exact percentage of how many students might be dismissed from special education services, but we do see students that are dismissed because we do have the requirement that every 3 years we need to do a reevaluation to see if a student continues to qualify. So we look at data from their current performance in the school. We also gather additional data through that reevaluation. So we do always have to reconsider to see if there's a continued need. So we have some students that do not show that need. Sometimes that may happen throughout their IEP, that they're making so much progress based on their goals and objectives that we may look at dismissal. And so I don't know the exact percentage, but, we could look that up for you. But I would say it probably most often happens with specific learning disability or SLD, because some of those other categories, it's more challenging to not continue to qualify. So it's really based on their continuing need for that specialized instruction. And some students may not continue to qualify for special education, but they may qualify as needing a 504 plan, where they would just need some accommodation. So that really would vary based on those individual needs of that student.
Awesome, thank you. And sorry I put you on the spot. There's no way you would have had the exact percentage or anything. Any other questions or comments from board members? Director DeShane?
Just a really quick thank you for the work that you all do all year long with all of our students and families. I really appreciate it. And I know that this special education series that we've done the last several board meetings has been super informative. Really appreciate all the time and energy you've all put into that. So thank you.
Yes, I also appreciate the presentation, so thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, with that, our next agenda item is item 4B, the Student and Staff Safety Task Force recommendations. Welcome Dr. Jennifer Cherry, Executive Director of Human Resources and Team.
Sounds good. Good evening, Co-Chair Arco, members of the board, Superintendent McIntyre. We have a whole team here to talk about student and staff safety and the task force that we engaged in this spring. This task force was established in January of this year. We met throughout the spring monthly, and the purpose of the task force was to conduct a comprehensive review of current safety practices and develop proactive strategies to enhance the well-being of all students and staff. It's a big, big goal. And we had some really significant stakeholders at the table that really put their brains together and had some great conversations. In this task force, a particular focus was placed on the prevalence, prevention, and response to dangerous student behavior, reducing the incidence of staff and student injuries resulting from student behavior, and generating metrics to measure and track effectiveness. And so throughout our time together, we did review some preliminary data around how we might measure metrics, and we examined some of the prevention and response strategies that we currently have in place, most specifically student programming and staff professional development. And then we came together to begin to think about, from each of our perspectives, what are the things as a group we really wanted to move forward as recommendations for your consideration on how to tackle these issues. In looking at the makeup and the membership of the task force, this is a rather unique group in that the focus here was to look at the leadership from our labor organizations. We did have a school board member participation with Co-Chair Arco and Director Jeff Simon. We had our leadership from our Paraeducators Association, and Jeremy Swanson, the president, and Gina Ubel, the vice president, are here this evening, are going to help present the findings or some of our recommendations. We had leadership from AHAM Local 7007, our teachers union, with Val Holtis as the sitting president, and vice president with John Conan. Incoming president, John Wohlhopter, is also here this evening. We had a variety of principals, both the principals AHESPA leadership with Jeff Leach, as well as a variety of other principals in this group. We did have representation from our Special Education Administrators Association. Jen Babraki's at the table, and she's going to share some information with us. And then we had a variety of district administrators that also came together and entered the conversation at various points throughout the spring. We did have, I think, a rather concise work plan in meeting 4 times and bringing forward these recommendations for you. And again, this group was brought forward specifically because they had that unique perspective of hearing from members of their labor organizations about what was bubbling up, what was of greatest concern. When we talk about student and staff safety, what are the greatest areas of concern? Most specifically, those incidents that sometimes are hard to measure in the data that we see, the number of incidents, the volume of incidents, and more about the stories and how these issues are really affecting our employees and our students. And so with that, we'll move forward, and the members here are going to help present the 6 recommendations that we're bringing forward for your consideration this evening. And Jen will start with our first one.
Absolutely. So for the first recommendation, our recommendation is to conduct an annual staff survey to gather feedback from staff regarding what safety protocols we should be using related to professional development. We want to make sure that the PD that we plan meets the needs of our stakeholders. So we want to make sure that we gather their feedback. So that's the first recommendation, is to do a survey sometime the next school year. I wasn't quite sure when, but I knew we're doing a survey. The second, should I keep going, Jen?
No, Gina's got number 2.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Gina Ubal, Vice President of the Anoka-Hennepin Paraeducator Association, and one of our recommendations was to purchase a de-escalation online training subscription from the CPI. It's called CPI Lite. Currently, our special ed staff all get CPI training, either annually as a refresher or less often as needed. But we've heard from paras and other employees in the district who also feel the need for that. It's not just special ed staff. It's not just special ed students. When a student is escalated, they need to know how to not have them escalate further and how to de-escalate a situation. This will be a foundational training to equip all school staff with essential knowledge and skills to handle crisis safely and effectively. It'll be a 30-minute online training. Thank you.
And I'm John Conan. I'll be talking about recommendation number 3. So number 3 is to conduct annual school staff training inclusive of the following topics. The first bullet is the student discipline policy and behavior matrix. So it's important for all staff to understand what the district's discipline policy is, and then to understand the matrix, so there's better understanding of what constitutes, for example, a major or a minor incident, and we want we want staff to understand the importance of how that matrix is built and the importance of reporting things so that we have accurate data for that. The second bullet, behavior incident documentation process. So again, continuing to how is that documented? Who is documenting it? And what is it exactly that needs to be recorded? So we have that consistency so that we are able to track what's going across the district and better address concerns as they bubble up or where we see pockets of need. So the same messaging, needs to happen there. And for example, Gina, who was sitting here earlier, shared, a lot of paras, which she represents, shared, I didn't know I was supposed to document that incident. So just being clear, what is it that we're documenting, who's documenting it, and again, the why behind it. The third bullet, reasonable force and the legalities of physical intervention. So again, not all staff maybe are clear on what they legally can and can't do. They see a need, they see somebody who's in a position of possibly harming somebody else or laying on the floor and like they would their child, they think, well, I need to, scoop this child up and keep this situation as safe as possible. But there's legalities to touching students in certain ways, and not every staff member is clear on that. So again, the need for training on that. And this is a yearly training because we do have influx of staff, or, even as a staff member who's been in the district for a long time, you may forget these things. So important to continue to train people on that. And then the fourth bullet, post-incident response protocol. And there's been a lot of reports from staff members like, hey, I didn't know what happened after this incident. I reported it. What was the follow-up? What am I supposed to do? What are next steps? There's just been a lot of uncertainty around that. For example, a student might do some, major behaviors in the room in which they had to be removed, or you had to evacuate the classroom. They may have threatened people with a weapon, or have, been used assaultive language, and yet, depending on the situation, they may be back in the classroom in minutes. And it's like, okay, well, how do I now respond to this where there's students have been traumatized, I may be traumatized as a teacher. How do I go forward to continue the learning and ensure safety in this environment? But there wasn't communication and like how that can happen. And I know as a district and as a state, we're trying to figure out when we, aren't allowed to send certain age groups home, K-3 in particular. But how do we provide the time to kind of have that decompression time? How can we do better as a district to be like, okay, this is how we can problem solve and come up with a plan within the restraints that we currently have under the law, but we can do better. And with that, also, some staff have shared, I was injured physically, emotionally, whatever. I was threatened. I had to go to the doctor. I had to put in a workman's comp report. And this isn't across the board, certainly, but I think we can do better as a district as a whole, where some people said, yeah, I never felt really cared for. Like I was hurt on this job that I'm working for this district, and nobody said, how are you? How are you doing? It was, what, you filled this form out wrong, you need to redo it, So how can we do better in treating our staff, and maybe even parents too, as a human first, like, hey, we're contacting you about an incident that happened with your child. How are you about hearing about what happened today in school? And I think there are many administrators who naturally do that, and some, just the way that, we all have different ways of being, but some are maybe more, I'm just thinking business, this is what needs to happen, but they're not thinking maybe necessarily like, how do I care for my staff? So training on how to do that. I mean, if we learn that, hey, these are the steps, and we ask, how are you doing? What can we do to care for you? These are your rights, that you have. Have you filled out these forms? Have you documented it? And just making sure that everybody's cared for as a human. Yeah, I think that's what I have for recommendation number 3.
For our fourth recommendation, to go along with all of the data collection and all of that, we would like to review District Student Discipline Policy 506. We hope that this would promote consistency in understanding and addressing challenging behaviors, and consider refining detailed definitions of what a disruptive behavior is, and provide clear direction to communicate these with staff. We're hoping that this will help create more clarity in what is a behavior and a consistent response to behaviors, so that we can do the data collection.
I have the recommendation number 5, and before I go forward with that, I'm hoping that you're hearing a theme here about data collection. So in the data review that we did, we often learned or understood some of our data collection mechanisms are fairly new. So for example, when we talk about injury, we've been very consistent about reporting injuries through workers' comp because we know what that is. Workers' comp injury is where someone loses time worked, and so they receive compensation in return for that missed time due to an injury, or they have sought medical care as a response to that injury. So that's fairly consistent, but a theme that we discussed throughout this process are the other types of injuries. So the emotional trauma that a staff member might be experiencing or feeling. Oftentimes that's not recorded anywhere. One new place that we do have in our student information system to record injuries is in Synergy as it pertains to a disciplinary incident. If there isn't any discipline, oftentimes that won't get recorded. And so through this deeper dive into really thinking about how we define these terms and how they're recorded and try to make sense of them, what you'll see is that theme kind of come up in a few of our recommendations is we need to dive deeper into how we define these items and then how are we consistently across our system recording this information so we can make better sense of it. Okay, now I'll jump back into recommendation number 5. As shared earlier, this team did examine some of the programs that we have in place right now, student programming specifically. One of the items that came up as more of a success story is the SOAR program as it currently exists at Coon Rapids Middle School. And so the committee is recommending that we examine implementing a reroute program, such as a SOAR program in every secondary school, and explore what that might look like for elementary options. These programs provide structured support for students who are exhibiting challenging behaviors, and with this aim to reduce disruptions and promote positive outcomes.
I have recommendation 6, John Wolhopter, HEM President-elect. This recommendation is to establish a working group or committee to create clear and consistent documentation expectations, especially around reporting processes for injuries and response to those injuries. As Dr. Cherry alluded to, we need to have a consistent process and definitions for what we're reporting in addition to a place to report it. So she mentioned Synergy is one option. When we look at things that you've heard in some of these sessions, like classroom evacuations, it's only really recently that we've had a place to keep that information, and that's led to some inconsistencies in how we've reported that. And so the goal of this recommendation is to establish a committee to create those definitions and create a consistent process for what is being reported, who's doing the reporting, and how they go about doing that reporting, so that ultimately, we can continue being a data-driven district to use that data to inform things, such as the professional development that was alluded to earlier, so that we can make sure that we're providing the professional development that's really needed based on what we're seeing as far as what's being reported.
And so with that, those are our 6 recommendations we are bringing forward at this time. This was a group that was established to complete this one task. As you can see in our recommendations, we are understanding that there are other working committees that would be required to do the follow-up work of these recommendations. We are here for any questions or comments that the board might have.
All right, well, thank you very much for the presentations. Board members, any questions or comments? Director DeShane?
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to all of you. It's clearly investment of time and some money for the recommendations that is being recommended showed us how seriously we're taking this as a district and as a board. I appreciate some of the recommendations that came or the discussions that started this. What I'm hearing, right, is a focus on clear definitions, that data collection, as well as the care for not only students and staff, but also their parents, because these can be difficult situations that are happening for everybody involved. So I just kudos to all of you and really appreciate the focus, and I think the recommendations are wise.
Superintendent
Well, I just
McIntyre.
want to take a moment to thank a number of the board members. So first, thank you to Co-Chair Arco, and I know Director Simon's not here tonight for participating. Director Hochman asked some questions earlier in the year that kind of got us thinking about how could we look at some of these, the data pieces in a different way. So hopefully what you're seeing is step one here, and I guess I got to call out the obvious. Look who's sitting here together. We have our labor groups working together on a common goal that sometimes we have friction over, right? So if anything else, this has led to a stronger partnership with a common outcome here. And what the themes that I want to stress is strong prevention, strong response. So how do we strengthen the preventative pieces so we don't have these incidents, but when they do, how do we react and respond in a stronger way? The next step with board support would be implementation planning then of each of the 6 recommendations. So really digging into an action plan for each of those areas at this task force. Their goal was to generate those recommendations, then the next steps would be to operationalize those and make them real. So that was our target for by the end of the year. And I just want to say thank you to many. That room is a big group. Having been in there, I know you. So you're representing your colleagues that are also part of the task force, and it's unique to have so many labor groups working on a common goal and a hard one like this one. So thank you from me as well.
Director Langenfeld.
I want to thank you as well. As I think about our multi-tiered system of support for academics, I think about the multi-tiered system of support for behavior. And what you're describing are exactly the same kinds of things in terms of defining each area of concern, collecting the data, progress monitoring, how we're doing, are we improving, are we not improving, the kinds of interventions that are put into place, both as the superintendent talked about, preventative improvements, but also those interventions, and then what kinds of response are we having for both students and staff. I think there isn't a single board member that doesn't care deeply about this area. It is one of our priorities that we really want to make sure we support well. I think we all, as the superintendent said, Director Hochman has raised this more than once, and very justifiably so, as have others. And I just want to really support in whatever way that we can come to these recommendations to be able to provide a system and not just fragmentation of these efforts, because I have been pushing for a data dashboard so we can monitor these as well. So I really think it's very important to what is said about definitions and making sure that we start to have those important conversations about what is a major, what is a minor, how do you put it in, because it can really help understand, because for the most part, when you look overall at data, for the size of the district and the number of students involved, you start to really recognize that there are some students with high needs. But sometimes they can slip through the cracks, and we don't know that for too long of a space. So that ready response, and at the same time, we can also then measure all of the hard work that's already underway in terms of supporting children in the behavior and the universal and, tier 1 and tier 2. So anyway, that's where I'm headed, and I appreciate all of what you've done so far. That sounds like a great start.
Superintendent McIntyre?
I missed it, and I knew Director Langenfeld would beat me to it. So the data dashboard, know, board members, that we are, and I think you saw my update this past week, we are working on a replacement for Viewpoint. So between Synergy and the new data replacement, we will have, as soon as we can get there, a much more live, real-time data dashboard visualization way to get that information, not just to you, but to all of us and our community and others, including our teachers, in a much more usable fashion. That's the whole point. So know that we're aggressively pursuing that as well. And I know lots of work has begun on the Synergy side of this and will continue to be developed as we move forward. So that is in the works, and we will continue to give you updates on that. And that's a very focused area for that dashboard that the board's been asking for a while here.
Director Hoekman?
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the hard work, and seems like a good starting point. At least we're starting to get the ball moving, but I want to make certain Anoka-Hennepin makes headlines for the amazing achievements of our students, and not because we're putting staff and students at risk. And while this is a step in the right direction, I don't know if further training and professional development is really the avenue that we want to go down. I want to make certain that the kids in the classroom are not being disrupted. We talked about those situations where classrooms are cleared because a student is dysregulated. We heard about staff who are on workman's comp because they've been injured. Those are very serious things that I don't know that purchasing another program that's going to give us 30 minutes more of training or trauma-informed de-escalation tactics are really what we need to do here. I want to make certain that our schools are the most amazing place that students enjoy coming to every day. And I think that things like the SOAR program are getting us in that right direction. I just want to make certain that we know every day, every one of our students is important, and so is every one of our staff members, and keeping all safe is the direction that we need to be going here. So a good stepping off point, but we have a lot of work yet to do.
All right, and then I have some comments and questions following on the heels of what everybody said. I appreciate Director Langenfeld's request for the data dashboard. I'm looking forward to that one as well. So my general takeaway of the 6 recommendations, I kind of categorized them in like a few ways. Director Hoekman said it best. 2 of them, I would say, fall into the category of training. I think training is useful. Maybe to state kind of Director Hoekman's concern in my own way, I think while training is certainly useful, there's also a point of diminishing returns, as with anything. So I'm not opposed to it. I'm not excited for the training, but I'm not like opposed to it. I think there's a ways to go there. And then the other categories I kind of thought about these recommendations in are the first one, doing the survey is learning. Again, I always think that's great, asking teachers for their input, what they're doing within the district, how we can do better, things like that. That's fantastic. And then another one was, there were 2 recommendations where we review a policy, and then we kind of, I think it was a recommendation 6, which was establish a committee to create clear and consistent documentation. So I kind of view that as getting to those metrics and then consistently applying how we deal with these things across the district, which again, that's all fantastic. And then the one, again, I actually agree with Director Hoekman on this, that I'm the most excited for is the implementing a reroute or SOAR program. I think that it's an actionable item that I think will have immediate impact. I think that's great. Everything we've heard so far from the existing reroute or SOAR programs has been good. So I think that's great. I think all of these are a step in the right direction. So that's kind of my take on the 6 recommendations. I appreciate all the hard work everybody did. So my questions are, kind of if we go all the way back to maybe where some of these conversations began, Corey, a while back, you had thrown out a metric for how many classroom evacuations we had. I think it was last year. So my question is kind of twofold. What was that number? What was that metric, that number for last year for classroom evacuations? And then, in you guys' opinions, how how are these 6 recommendations going to help bring that number down?
So thank you for the question, and it's one we've been using legislatively too, right? So as we've been talking to our legislators about changing the K-3 discipline law, the real data and real stories is what matters. I don't believe it's going to happen this go around, but maybe we've laid the foundation for next session or beyond. And maybe I can take a shot at a couple of your questions there. So I would say it's a ballpark about 200 per year. So what I've told our legislators is that over last year and this year, we've had roughly 400 over 2 years, situations that like you described. So the reason the training matters is if we can identify early triggers or early warning signs and prevent them from happening in that whole disruptive situation and prevent injuries, we need to try. So that's one of our goals. The K-3 discipline or student behavior program that the board asked for, you've seen us working on that throughout the year. That'll be ready for next year. So we got some models. That program, you referenced the Coon Rapids Middle School SOAR program along with the Blaine High School model program that we saw last August as well. So we have some good success stories to build on. And I think you're all sort of suggesting how do we take that and translate that across our district more effectively. So those are just a couple thoughts off the top. Trust me, I've let every legislator that will listen know that's our story and why we needed a change to the current K-3 rules. We'll keep working with what we have, but I am hopeful that we've laid a foundation for some changes in the sessions to come. So I don't know if I took anyone's. And the other part of that student, I appreciate the board for being focused on also the staff impact. And I'm looking at Jennifer from an HR perspective. We're tracking in the same way those kind of injuries that disrupt work or keep people out of work, and what kind of support that does it require technically, but also emotionally, so they come back and feel supported. So we got work to do. I like how the way you said that, Director Hochman. We have lots of work to do here, but I think you've given us a roadmap that we can do together so that we're working across labor groups towards a common goal.
Can I just
Yeah,
respond?
go for it.
I think what Superintendent McIntyre just shared about the data that we have available to us, approximately 400 classroom evacuations over the past 2 years. When we did look at that information, if my memory serves me correctly, and I'm going to look around at the team here and see, was it about 260 some this year as of January. So one thing though, as we really did that data dive, what we found out again is we're very new at tracking classroom evacuations. We really have about 3 years of data, this being our 3rd year. So last year was a year where we actually had a full year of information. What we learned is we're not consistent about the way that we're tracking classroom evacuation. Some of the classroom evacuations that were recorded might have been in a classroom that had 2 rooms, and there was something going on with one student, and so these students just moved over to the next room and continued with all of their learning activities, kind of just in a regroup a little bit. Sometimes we found out that we were recording classroom evacuations when we pulled a student out of the classroom, right? Which is the opposite of what we meant by classroom evacuations, where all of the students need to leave the classroom and instruction is 100% interrupted. And so getting to a place where we're clear in how we're defining these issues and that we're tracking them consistently across the system is still work that we need to do. And that's hopefully one of the themes that you saw across these recommendations is we didn't, as you'll see, we didn't outline specific metrics, but really looking at a working group that can define these behaviors and ensure that we have a protocol for how we're recording them. So in saying that, Co-Chair Arco, I think once we have our tracking mechanism clearly implemented and consistent across our system, we will find out if we have a baseline yet. If we do have a pretty good baseline, we might have an increase in the number as we're more consistently tracking that across our system before it starts to go down. So we're new in the process.
That all makes sense, that's fair. Thank you for the explanation. And then my second question for everybody is, so I had kind of pointed this out in one of the committee meetings, is I was hoping to see in some way, and I'll be very specific how I define this, the district shift the onus of responsibility for student behaviors from the district to parents. So what do I mean by that? I'll just paint a picture. So let's say hypothetically, if my child disrupts a classroom, I get a call, the teacher said, hey, your kid did such and such, we had to evacuate the classroom, or it disrupted, we lost 15 minutes of learning time. We need to make sure this doesn't happen again. The best response that that I'm hoping to see from ideally as many parents as possible is, thank you for letting me know that. I'm going to take care of that. This isn't going to happen again, or I'm going to do everything I can to make sure this doesn't happen again. That's kind of the ideal, the gold standard I'm hoping for. So obviously that's not going to happen every time. No one's saying it is. But I had pointed out a specific subset, like a specific demographic of students, to kind of pose this question about, which is students that don't have any IEPs or any special ed requirements because there are no laws or constraints or anything surrounding them. So for those students that have very disruptive behaviors, I know none of these recommendations, I asked internally, none of these recommendations are going to shift the onus of responsibility from the district to the parents. But what are some things that we could do, in theory, if we wanted to, I certainly want to go beyond engaging parents, although certainly we want to engage them. That's the ideal first step. If we can engage them in the networks, fantastic. But for those parents who engagement either doesn't work or they're just not interested, how can we shift the onus of responsibility from the district onto the parents to deal with their students' disruptive behaviors for the benefit of not only their student, but all of the other students in the classroom who are learning out on or losing out on learning time, or maybe feeling unsafe because of whatever's happening? What are some things we can actually do to move the needle in that direction?
Well, I think one thing the board could do is, just going to jump right in. One of the things that you as a board can do is help us review our discipline policy. Our response to behavior is really steeped in our policy and what we do to follow, like you said so well, students that don't have additional requirements or protections, right? In accordance with, I guess, we look at those statutes and things that drive our policy, but that's where you have the biggest influence as a board on how we respond to the range of behaviors that we work with every day. I would say, and I know this, and I'm looking at Dr. Langenfeld as a past principal, every one of those moments is working with the parent in some fashion because of the impact it has on that child and other child's school day. So there's, I think, some things we can do, some limitations as well. But right away my head went to how do we implement our policy and the procedures that we follow around the policy, right? And I'm assuming, I wasn't in all the task force meetings, but I'm assuming that probably surfaced at some point. And where does our role end in the parents begins is that tough intersection that you're kind of calling out so well, Director Arco, because of the nuance of those things. So, and then just the volume as well. What kind of resources do we have to put towards it? So those are just some high-level questions and maybe thoughts I have that we'll just have to kind of flesh out through the implementation plan of all these recommendations.
Director Hoekman.
Yeah, taking off of that, there's policy 529, notification to staff notification of students with violent behavior. Ensuring that staff know if there is a student with a propensity of violence, that they are notified in writing. How often does that happen?
I don't have that on the top of my mind or top of my head. That's not a number I have memorized. I thought I saw Tim Palmetier in here, but maybe he's not in here now. But I knew that we use that policy often, so when we get to that criteria, we do follow that policy. I also think of Ray Brodier and Mary Kling involved with us in that. So that is information I can get back to you on, yeah.
That would be great, just because as we're speaking with these staff that are working daily in a situation, they should definitely be aware of a student who's likely, especially since that's a policy. I guess I'm just thinking of it as a classroom teacher, working in the district for 25 years. I guess I never saw that happen, but maybe I just, out of all those students, never had a student who had any tendency to violence. A follow-up, in addition then, Director Arco, or Co-Chair Arco, that was a good idea to continue to consider how we're involving parents in this discussion, because they're the primary educators. And that's what, even when it says in state statute, that they're the primary educators, and we need to be able to turn to them and look for their assistance in ensuring that our classrooms are safe. Because while all the stakeholders at this meeting, representing the different groups of staff, we didn't have any parents at the meeting. And that's my primary concern, is the students. I certainly want all staff to be safe, but thinking of, as was pointed out, the emotional trauma of staff when dealing in a situation like this, I can only imagine what it's like to be a young child in a violent situation, to witness that, to have to clear your classroom because such a situation happened, and how that's affecting our children. And so, important to think of the staff, more important to think of the students, and how we ensure that education is happening.
Director Langenfeld?
As I've thought about this, and I've voiced this before, our parents oftentimes are in extremely exhaustive states because they've been trying to support the student at home and not successful. So then the question I keep going back to is, are we able, or is there a space, and I've looked at the new department at MDE, we need help to support our parents at times. When you have a child who is consistently struggling, and we are putting IEPs together, the parent is always aware, and they too are struggling. So then the question is, what kind of support does that family need that goes above us? And that's really what often we're seeing. And so then I go back to the State Department, and they've added this new children and families, and I keep thinking they should have some help. I just think there has to be a place where we really go back to the fact, to your point, the child is doing this for a reason, whatever it is. We don't always know what that is, and there aren't always antecedents where we can see that it's going to happen. So then it's a question of, how can we help the child, the classroom, the little ones that are traumatized potentially by what's happening, the teacher, all of the above. And I keep going back and saying that part of the reason is that it's been put on K-12, and it is a much bigger issue than K-12. It's family and systems. So I just keep looking and saying, if we can get advocates for parents, if we can provide, and I know PACER does, and that's always helpful, and it's always been helpful. But how do we help other parents who may not have a child who is, identified with an IEP? And yet, to your point, so we could, and I know we have the disruptive student policy in place, and I think it's important that we look at our policies very carefully. But I also believe that there has to be a place of innovative practice where we can support parents who are struggling at the same time, because that will get just as an important result as well, I think. So I don't want to lose sight of that. I'm not sure what the answer is, but there must be some models out there that we haven't seen or looked at yet.
Just to throw one other comment out there, Director DeShane, you've asked, and it's been asked many times, what is it that we're referring to when we use like the term equity, or what would we like to see ended with equity in the district? I've made mention of the fact that equity, while there are certain programs and behaviors or just actions, it's more of a philosophy that I'm interested in, although all of those things matter. And perhaps the single best representation of the philosophy of equity is the K-3 Non-Exclusionary Discipline Act, which is tied our hands in a lot of ways. That is, let's say, not constructive for anyone, especially the students that are no longer allowed to be suspended or expelled, to receive the help and the planning they need. And that philosophy is kind of what's governing the district's actions right now. And it really comes down to something that is difficult to acknowledge, but it's just the reality of the situation. When you have disruptive students who are engaging in levels of behavior that cause us to evacuate an entire classroom, okay, we're making a choice right there. We're deciding who's gonna pay the price for that disruptive behavior. Is it the student doing the disruptive behavior, or is it everyone else in the classroom who's not doing the disruptive behavior? And according to the philosophy of equity, how it plays out in practice and what we're currently doing is we're making all of the students who are not doing the disruptive behavior pay the price for the student who is doing the disruptive behavior. Now, obviously, it goes without saying, we want to help that student, we want that student to learn. All of that is true. But because we live in the real world where we're not given solutions, we're given painful trade-offs sometimes, you have to choose who's going to pay this cost and what's the best we can do, knowing that the best is never going to be perfect. When you go down the path of equity, it's make other people pay. When you go down the path of what I'm trying to ask for, it's not even make the child pay or the student pay, it's how can we get the parents to be the ones that deal with the situation or incur the cost, rather than incurring that cost on all the other students who otherwise weren't doing anything wrong in the first place. So just to explain, that's again, to help kind of shine a light on what I mean when I talk about equity happening in the district. This is the best example of this. I would like to see classroom evacuations go down to 0. I know that's not going to happen for the foreseeable future, but that would be my goal, but that would require a shift in philosophy, essentially. So, Director Langenfeld?
Perhaps a change in state statute would be helpful.
I couldn't agree more. And the state statutes are based on the philosophy of equity. So that's certainly outside of our control,
Yeah.
but it's kind of the point I'm making.
I don't see it as equity at all, quite frankly. I do see it as a decision that was made that wasn't carefully thought of, and all stakeholders were not brought to the table for this. And quite frankly, we have advocated for it, and it's not always popular to advocate, in support of the opportunity to plan for children in partnership with parents. It seems to defy logic in my brain as well. So I'll just stop.
Yes.
I think you're all on the same page. We've tried to lobby the legislature that time's really the issue here. We know the way the laws are designed right now, we can't prohibit students from being in school long-term, but what we need to figure out is why something's happening, and the time the time needed to figure that out and get kids what they need. So what we're lacking right now is that ability to get that done. And Director Hochman, you said it well, that there's lasting effects when something big like that happens. It just doesn't go away the next day. There's an impact. So we've tried to tell that story. We're going to keep telling that story and keep moving this along, I think. And I appreciate all of you acknowledging this is step one on getting to some of those things we all hope to have happen. So I think there's lots of different ways of saying, I see commonality here on what we all want. I think we all agree we'd love to see that number be 0. That's what we have to shoot for. So here's our first effort to move us in that direction. And I appreciate, again, the collective effort amongst our groups that sometimes are at different perspectives. And in this case, have a unified one. So thank you for that.
Thank you guys very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, and with that, our next agenda item is item 4C, the 10-year long-term facility maintenance plan, first read. Welcome, as people are transitioning out, welcome Greg Cole, Chief Operations Officer, Michelle Vargas, Chief Financial Officer, Ben Martinson, Director of Buildings and Grounds.
Good evening, co-chairs Arco and Shane, Superintendent McIntyre, members of the school board. I'm joined by Ben Martinson, Director of Buildings and Grounds, and we're here to provide you with our annual presentation of our fiscal year 2027 Long-Term Facilities Maintenance Plan. It's a 10-year plan. Tonight, we're also going to be talking with you about the condition of our pools. I know pools keeps coming back to you as a regular topic, but we do have some updates that are relevant in context with our 10-year plan. We aren't seeking any decisions tonight, but we would like your feedback or comments that you have with regard to the information that we provide to you. So in terms of a 10-year plan, an LTFM plan, which is long-term facilities maintenance, so I'll refer to that as LTFM. It's a revenue program supported by the Minnesota Department of Education for the purpose of allowing school districts to address deferred capital expenditures and maintenance projects necessary to prevent further erosion of facilities. So how is LTFM funded? Long-term facility maintenance is funded statewide on a $380 per pupil allocation generated by levy and general fund aid. How does Anoka-Hennepin qualify? To qualify for LTFM revenue, a district must develop a 10-year facilities plan and submit that plan to the Commissioner of Education. The plan must be updated and approved by the school board each year. LTFM may only be used for deferred maintenance projects, for increasing facility accessibility, and for health and safety purposes. And they may not be used on leased spaces. And just for an update for everyone, we have reduced the number of spaces that are leased by the district significantly. We're really down to 2 remaining facilities, one of which is quite small. How are projects determined? School board priorities, Buildings and Grounds Department collaborative process, the Facilities Condition Index that we've used for some time, and input from school sites, administration, and staff. And I'm going to turn it over to Ben Martinson, who can add to that in other parts of our 10-year plan.
Yeah, so this page is basically a broad summary and breakdown of the major categories for this next fiscal year's LTFM allocations and where they're going. As you can see, some of the bigger ones that ring the bell are mechanical systems, health and safety, sites and grounds, which are parking lots, asphalt repair, stuff of that nature. And then just, professional service and salaries for all the folks, my team and around the district that get lumped into this group. On the next slide, we have a further breakdown, kind of some of the bigger standalone projects that are based in and where the regards of and scope of work and phasing, et cetera. So just kind of going down briefly, it's, Eisenhower is the final phase. Dayton is in its final phase. We will be starting Andover's phase 1 next summer, which, we'll be doing design development along with this building for our dehumidification, kind of continuing on with that commitment to get rid of unit ventilators and go with the more displacement HVAC systems. We'll also have pools, or Madison, we're coming back to phase 4 of next summer to kind of come back and do some cleanup area there. It's to kind of, where we mothballed or stepped away from that project, we're going back to kind of finish up that one. Then we have the 2 pools that are significantly kind of, part of this summer, next summer, and then Greg's next briefing, so.
So in your packet, what you have are 10 years kind of aggregated in 2 different ways. One is by the categories that Ben mentioned, for example, physical hazards, environmental safety, fire safety, indoor air quality, and so forth. You can see the expenditures for the next 10 years, beginning fiscal year 27 for those. And then we also have it broken down for you by school. So if you have particular interests in any particular school and what's planned in this 10-year plan, you can see those things. I would tell you, though, or advise you that those are placeholders. We do have things come up. It's sort of like when your car breaks down and you get some surprises. Those can be quite expensive at times, and so when we have those things arise, it forces us to make adjustments to our 10-year plan. We do make sure that our school administrators are aware of that because they do remind us pretty frequently that, hey, I thought that this project was scheduled for 2025 and you're not coming in 2025. Why is that? We do try to make sure that they're aware of that, particularly with major projects that they're sort of planning around and making arrangements for. We let them know if there's going to be any sort of adjustments or changes to that well ahead of time. So before I dive into pools specifically, with that, we take any comments or questions from the school board.
Any questions from board members? Director DeShane?
For the Phase 4 at Dayton Elementary, when that's complete, will all the classrooms at that point be walled with a door?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, this summer, right now, we're doing phase 3. Next summer will be the final phase, and then that'll be completely done and really nice looking.
And I should give a shout out to the board, just for our public's awareness, that that was a strategic investment made by the school board a few years back to ensure that that school was secured. It was our last of the 70s concept open classrooms in the school district.
Director Hoekman?
Yeah, can you just remind me, what does dehumidification mean?
It's not air conditioning, it's taking humidity out of the air, so it makes it feel cooler, but isn't actually cooling. It's not going across, basically, cooling not lack of a radiator, but the opposite. I'm having a brain fart here right now, what it's called, but, so you're not conditioning the air, you're just pulling the humidity out of it, so it does feel more comfortable, so.
So with the schools that have been completed and those that are here, what percentage are we looking at that are done versus not done?
I think we're through about 60% of the district as far as having some sort of, every school has some sort of dehumidification. Just depends on the percentage of the building that's done, where we left off, and kind of the need to kind of go back and button some of those up and revisit them.
I would chime in though, and you can correct me, the 60% might be based on total square footage.
Yep.
So we don't do field houses at the high schools, for example, or cafeterias in many of our spaces.
Correct.
But when we're looking at classrooms, we're going to be pretty close within the next 5 years to having all of them completed in regular classroom spaces.
And then, maybe this is a dumb question, do they have these dehumidification systems as opposed to air conditioning?
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
So there's kind of a couple of, just the origin of that, like why dehumidification versus air conditioning. Dehumidification is a system that's energy efficient. And in addition to that, most of our spaces did not have air conditioning at all. So in terms of using LTFM for that and you're replacing like for like, you couldn't replace a non-air conditioning system with an air conditioning system, but a dehumidification system did qualify for those funds. So that's kind of the reason and rationale for that, because it essentially has the effect of air conditioning in a sense, in terms of how you feel in the space. I will just, for transparency, when the temperatures start getting in the 90s, it gets stressed on that. It's not functioning exactly like air conditioning would, but it's pretty darn close. Is that accurate?
Very.
All right.
Yeah, they do have a design temperature limit, and when we have some of those unseasonable 5-6 days of really high temperatures, they get stressed, and we just can't keep up. We do increase our running at night and stuff like that to try to recover the building a little bit, but it's only so much we can do with what we have, so.
Superintendent McIntyre?
I just want to acknowledge, and board members, I know you're with me on this, but we could probably give this team $500 million and they would have projects ready to go to do it. So the challenge here is the prioritization of projects with the dollars we have. The board knows we need to tackle operating costs. We would also love more money from a bonding standpoint to take care of our facilities and everything in and around them like this. So it is a puzzle that continually gets put back together on a regular basis with your help and your direction on what do we put at the top of that list, knowing that something else is going to have to be pushed down the road, and that 10-year plan is a constant rework. So we all wish we could give you a bigger set of resources to fix this, and I just always want to commend our team for doing their best to be dialed in on what can we have the biggest impact with these dollars for. And you saw the attachment in your materials, the volume of projects that are always going on. And then before we walked into the board meeting, that's contingent on, I hope we have good weather this summer so they can get those done on time when we open our doors in the fall. Just want to commend the team and know that there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of contracting work and things to just get the projects we can do done so that we're using every last dollar as most powerfully as we can.
So I think, and I appreciate that, Superintendent McIntyre, I think a simple way to look at this is At a minimum, over the next 10 years, easily $500 million in projects that would qualify for this that I would characterize as needs, not wants. And we'll have about 150 million at 15 million per year to be able to tackle that. So prioritization is a big deal to us. You have less than a third of the funds to be able to accomplish what you need to accomplish, which is why, we bring these topics to you over and over again as they arise, to be sure that as much as possible, we're all on the same page on what we choose to prioritize with the limited funds that we have. So just to kind of wrap up, we will be coming back to the June 24th school board meeting to essentially present this to you again at the public meeting. And at that time, we'll be asking for the school board's approval of our fiscal year 27 10-year long-term facilities maintenance plan.
Director Langenfeld?
Just as a follow-up, and having looked at the numbers, one of the curiosity as I was looking at everything, and it looks like things, fire safety, for example, went from 621,000 to over 1 million and then de-escalated again. And I kept looking at the bottom line, and you were maintaining the bottom line, but things were going up and down, depending, in terms of what projects. Electrical comes into play.
Yep.
So it is a puzzle. It looks like a puzzle when you look at all the numbers, but if you keep looking at the bottom line, it doesn't change.
Nope. Right.
So I applaud you for that thinking, and again, just out of curiosity, having looked in prior plans, how close does that usually, is it somewhat close as you project out what you've done in the past? Does it look similar? I'm just curious more than anything. Or is there no way to do that? And it's just something to.
So just to clarify, are you saying is what we actually do close to what we plan to do?
Correct.
Yeah. I would say, well, yes and no.
I mean,
the big things,
the money's
yes.
the money. Right.
Yeah, I would say we've gotten a lot crisper about specifically what we need to do in the future, and just a total district evaluation of kind of the condition of our assets. And so I'd say you're going to see a closer correlation between the two.
Okay.
The tricky part, though, maybe that you're also getting at is inflation.
Right.
And that's
Concerning.
exceptionally challenging. A lot of these numbers, in terms of like, what is allocated from the state, they don't change much over time. They certainly don't keep up with inflation, so you're really asked to do more with less on a regular basis. And I would say, we talk a lot about thinking outside the box. I would say that's how you have to function all the time. I mean, that's just the way you have to function in order to try to make sure that things are running smoothly.
Director Langenfeld?
That's fine.
Sorry, Hoffman.
So I think you said you were going to come back maybe with more information about pools, or?
I'm gonna do it right now.
You're going to do that now? Great.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes,
Gotcha.
sorry, yeah. Okay. So, I think over the last 18 months, we've come to you 3 or 4 times with updates on pools. And we've had to make some tough decisions, in terms of mothballing, for example, Oakview's pool as a cost savings measure. At the last time that we presented to you, we talked a little bit about 2 pools, specifically the pool at Anoka Middle School Fred Moore campus and the pool at Northdale Middle School, which serve 4 of our 5 high schools swim and dive teams, both the boys and the girls teams. Just a little history, which I provided you some history again, just so that you had something to reference. But these 2 facilities in particular are both now 50 years old. A lot of the systems are original. The last time we spoke to you, we estimated the cost of upgrading those pools was somewhere in the neighborhood of $7 to $8 million. Based on recent information, which I would sort of compare to, you know, again, I'll use the take your car to the mechanic analogy, and then you get the phone call that says, yep, this is wrong as you thought, but then also this, this, and this are also failing, and you're gonna have to make a decision about whether you're gonna fix those. That's a little bit what we're looking at. So based on recent evaluations, the repairs for those two pools may be in the neighborhood of $9 to $12 million. And they're getting close, some of the systems are getting close to failed or failing. We're keeping them going, but there's a number of structural and mechanical types of things that we're looking at. This price tag, just for awareness, if we were to do all of these repairs at both of these facilities, I think maybe the frustrating thing would be you would walk in and you wouldn't necessarily see any changes, because these are specific to mechanical and structural needs in both of these facilities. There's a lot more at the Anoka Middle School facility than at Northdale's, but both have some significant challenges. So we've been doing a lot of talking about potential solutions, different ways of looking at this. We haven't necessarily come up with an option that's not expensive, but we wanted to keep it on your radar, and also, you know, get any feedback from board members about these topics. I don't like to be overly dramatic about any of this. I will tell you, in working with an architect, we feel pretty confident in these numbers, and that, you know, we're going to have to figure out a path forward and what that might look like, particularly in the face of budget reductions. So, sorry for the doom and gloom, but it's just more reality. It is what it is. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Ben.
Not especially.
Okay. So with that, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to ask. I'm just putting it out there. Obviously, we will be looking for any feedback from board members in the near future. I'm just giving you this information now, so if you don't have questions now, that's totally understandable. But I guess we would ask, you know, for you to consider this and to provide any feedback to us, and we'll probably continue to keep this on your radar in the short and long term as we try to make decisions about what we're gonna invest in and how we're gonna do that.
Any questions or comments from board members? Director Langenfeld?
I think it would be accurate to assume that you'll continue to look for solutions too.
Yes.
To bring those, because I would like to hear what thoughts you would have to rearrange some things. I'm not sure there would be any appetite to not address this need. But the question is, can we do it creatively? I don't know that I have the answer, and maybe I'm stepping out more than others would be. But I would like to look for solutions to continue. And again, I noticed that it wouldn't even, I mean, any of the physical plant wouldn't change dramatically, and so it wouldn't look like an upgrade or updated
Correct.
facility. And that's just the baseline, right? What you shared.
Yeah, we're just talking mechanical and structural. So specifically, like in layman's, just heating the pool, circulating the water, heating the facility, keeping the humidity and temperature correct, and then also just the structural side of piping, tunnels, roof structures, all those kinds of things. Essentially, a pool environment is really hard on the infrastructure, just the nature of the chlorine, the humidity, all those kinds of things. It's hard on electronics, it's hard on piping, it's just hard on the systems overall. So those are just the challenges that we're looking at. And in many ways, these two facilities, I mean, kudos to who designed them to begin with. They're 50 years old. I mean, that's a long, long time and we've been doing some things to them, but we're really facing some pretty significant changes that we're gonna have to make.
Superintendent McIntyre?
Yeah, it's a bit of a somber topic, but I think reality is just important. So, you know, from a choice standpoint, the board has to be thinking ahead around, do you continue to prioritize this through LTFM dollars, which just means other projects don't get done if the costs go up? Or you like other facility needs we have, you think about bond with local dollars, because we're, you know, at least short-term, the state dollars aren't going to be there in the next biennium. So we can't really hope that there'll be, at least as projections go now, we're not going to see a large increase in state dollars for the facilities areas, likely. So we'll just have to, you know, so what other revenue streams do we have to try to tap into or address this need? So we won't have that answer tonight. Today was just building awareness and beginning to think, what options do we have?
And the reality is that the tough part, so just a real quick hit of things that you have to make choices on are asphalt, you know, parking lots, potholes, cement, sidewalks, right? So there's a lot of visual things or things that can affect people's drive in and out of parking lots and those sorts of things that at 50 sites, we are constantly upgrading those things as efficiently as we can. Our mechanical systems is the same thing. We get those are pretty big ticket items when they go down, and we have to make those types of repairs. Roof systems, you know, we think about the square feet of the inside square footage, but we have a lot of square feet of roof systems that need to be cared for, and the price tags on those are pretty heavy. So these are some of the things that are pretty tough to not take care of when they fail. And so those are just tough choices. Those are the things that we're looking at out into the future, so.
Director Hoagman.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here thinking about this challenge. It's got to be a challenge that all school districts across the state face. At one time, swimming was required, so I think almost every middle school across the state seemed to have a pool. So just wondering how we're biggest school district in the state, so we have a budget that's of a magnitude that, while these are really big expenses, it makes it just a little bit more manageable. Have you inquired at all what some of these small districts do to maintain their pools? Because some of them have, I can think of like Columbia Heights pool I've been to, and that thing's, I mean, that's got to be, you know, 70 years old, you know,
Yeah,
things like
yeah.
this. So how are other places managing this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in a lot of different ways. So in some cases, they might be leasing facilities, and then you're able to use lease levy dollars in that case. We don't have pools nearby that we would be able to lease for. It's not geographically close for us. That's an Olympic-sized pool where you can have competitions at. Another thing is about 2/3 of the state, I want to say, last time I think about 150 out of the 350 school districts have swimming. So most of the high schools in the state don't have swimming. I'm not advocating, and I want to be clear, I'm not advocating for eliminating it. I'm just saying there's a lot of districts that can't afford to do it. You know, we've talked about this before, not all districts are funded the same way per pupil. So there's different challenges there with regard to the per pupil funding, that the dollars that districts have access to. But with that said, we're continuing to try to find answers to those types of questions, because certainly if there's something out there that somebody's doing that we're not thinking of, we absolutely will try it if it's a more effective, efficient way to be doing things. And we'll continue pursuing what those answers might be.
Any other questions or comments from board members? All right, well, thank you guys very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, our next agenda item is item 4D, the Morris Leatherman Survey Discussion. Welcome back, Corey McIntyre, Superintendent, Jim Skelly, Executive Director of Communications and Public Relations, Dr. Jana Romer-Hurt, Executive Director of Research, Evaluation, and Testing.
Board members, I'll start us off, if you don't mind, as our team's getting settled in, and you got a lot of years of experience at the table here with this survey. So it's a good opportunity for questions. But just to set this up a little bit, it's we want to bring this to you. This is we've done this mainly since 2002. I thought you had told me, Jana, this survey, and the question gets posed, and it's a good question, how do we use this? Why do we do this, right? And my overarching question or answer to that is, it really is one of the key ways that we ask our community, what does our community or communities want us to invest in and prioritize and focus on? So in your materials, you see a summary there that this is one of the few scientific, statistically valid samples we try to gather from across the district, all areas of the district, to try to mirror the population of our district. We use it to, of course, drive our scorecard, but we also use that to figure out and give the board feedback on levels of satisfaction. What are the serious issues that are out there? Are we spending our taxpayer money effectively? What's the tax tolerance? We are at half of the tax levy that our neighboring districts have. And it's one way we can get at that. We've asked specific topics in this survey. So recently we asked questions around the budget reductions, for example, schedules, middle school, high school schedules. And last year we folded in some questions about how much is too much, how much is too little on any given area. So it really gives us a community perception of those things, along with what are our strengths and our challenges. On that second page of your background materials there's a list of things too that I think as a school board it's very valuable to you. For example, what is the effectiveness of a variety of things? Not only your performance as a board, but the administration's performance, our spending, teacher performance, decision-making. How well are we doing with our financial management and communication? We learn a lot usually from the communication piece. I'm looking at Jim. They tell us, what's the most preferred way to get information. But we've also tackled things, like I said, start times, school schedules. It's a way to get some policy input. We looked at the play-up policy in my first year. That was another one that we asked about. Levy awareness. I think with the funding conversations we've had tonight, really having a pulse on our community around what's the tolerance of the community around our financial situation. Those are just some examples of things we've used this survey for, along with just setting our priorities. The survey really does help us. What is most important to our community when we are setting those priorities? So that's a variety of things I have here, and this was just to create some space for you to discuss whether you'd like to pursue this again for another year. I would recommend it, knowing that we have another budget phase 3 reduction process coming up. There's some critical questions we can fold in there. It's just more information for your decision-making as a board, and I would think you would want as much information as you can get to inform your decision-making. And we're a little late in the timeline with all the other things we've been wrestling with, but we can still get that done, I believe, in time to inform, especially that budget reduction process that we're going to step into this summer. So I'll turn it back over to you, Co-Chair Arco, and I have Jonna and Jim here because they've done this for many, many years, more than I have, and can really give you some more nuances around how we've used this, should you have those kind of questions.
Well, just to start with, do any board members have any thoughts or comments they'd like to provide? Director DeShane.
Thank you. I mean, I think I'll start simply. I think receiving information from our community of stakeholders is like of the utmost importance, especially as we're building the process for our next round of budget reductions, as we're facing some of these challenges in the district around how do we do that, what happens next, the conversations we're hearing here about our facilities. And I have found the information we've received back very valuable, just in thinking about what kinds of questions should we be asking, which topics should we be investigating further. I think it's critically important that we reach out and talk to our community in this way.
So I have a thought, because we did do the survey last year. It costs, what's the cost? Corey, is it like $30,000 or so? About. So always keep in mind that it's not free, which is fine. Everything costs money, but in a budget cut environment, spending money, especially after what we heard about the pools, is a sensitive thing. So there's kind of 2 points of interest that jumped out at me at the last year's work session when we talked about the Morris Leatherman survey. The first one was, the community is about evenly split on whether or not they would support a referendum, and there's a certain dollar sign attached to that, but it was a toss-up, like a 50-50. So we ultimately didn't wind up asking at this point, but just something to keep in mind. So it wasn't a clear yes, it wasn't a clear no. The other one, which I found fascinating, was we did ask about all of the, I guess you could say, divisive topics and, what to do with them, what's the sentiment of the community about those things. And I believe on every single one of them, the feedback skewed in the direction of less divisive topics, more just focus on, reading, writing, arithmetic, basic educational things. So my question then for the administration is, what did we do with that feedback? In any way, shape, or form, did we take that feedback and then maybe have less of the divisive topics or anything like that?
Well, I would answer that with, we've followed the board direction on those areas. We had lots of meetings on many of those topics, but I think you're right. That was the too much matrix that we asked them to do last year. So that was good information, right, for us to have. And then we bring that back and we just don't act on that without board direction. It's really information for the board to consider, and as we're setting our direction, or you as a board, I should say. So that's kind of my response to that, is depending on topics, we followed the board guidance or direction on whatever the topic may be. But I think that's a really good example of, that's a good set of questions to ask on an annual basis and be monitoring and, asking, because it's all contextual, what is meaningful right now. And there's a number of those questions as I look at Jonna that we ask year over year to get a sense for, has that shifted, has that stayed stable, and why, right? And usually when Peter comes, he'll tell us what's behind it. And he can give us, I also always appreciate, he tells us how it means for us here in our district, but how that stands across the state and across the metro. That gives us a different perspective that we don't always get on any number of those questions. So I don't know if other board members have perspectives on it, but that's my answer.
Director Langenfeld?
As I think about this particular survey tool, and I'm not going to go to the questions, just the value of the tool has to do with the fact that it is a highly reliable and valid tool. So for me, whatever questions we ask, we cannot dismiss the fact that we are getting sample sizes that are valid and statistically significant. And I think the other piece is, in any kind of survey we put out, if we just do it ourselves and people can respond to it, we don't know who's answering, and does it really represent a broad spectrum of the district. So for me, as we look to important questions that we really need the answers to, I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity from every school in this district to speak. And that's the thing that this particular survey brings, that a general survey going out to families from central office, as we've done, may not always give us statistically significant. We don't always know. So am I correct in that?
Yeah, can I respond? Yes, you are correct. This survey, because it's a random sample and it's stratified across communities, so it's proportionate to, the community, people living in each community, it is generalizable to the full community. We use it in many ways to validate our voluntary surveys, because those are purely representative of the people that choose to respond. This one gives us a random sample, so it does represent the full scope of the population.
Thank you.
And then what was the total number of survey responses we got? I'm forgetting, I should have looked it up, but do you know off the top of your head how? 5,000?
500.
500, okay.
Yeah, we usually, the co-chairs, I'm looking at you both from last year, we talked with Peter about what size sample does the district want us to use. There's different versions, and sometimes an extra, we may have extra questions for, I'm looking at Jonna, for parents,
Yes.
for example. So
Yep.
there's a separate set of questions if the board wants those for unique feedback on a specific item from that subgroup.
And we did that last year. We had, and it's statistical, so that 500 is representative within a, 95% margin of error. And we did a 500 person sample, and then if I'm correct, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, we also did a 400-person parent balloon survey with that to get specific information from parents in terms of their perceptions and how they're similar and different as of the community as a whole.
Board, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Director Hoekman?
Yeah, thank you. You know, last year I was not supporting this survey. But as I'm looking at it now, it is interesting to see some of the feedback, such as the most highly responded to serious issue in the district was high taxes. And for financial management, 35% said that they were unfavorable of our responsibility in that financial management area. And just to that point, it was 32% thought there was an overemphasis on DEI topics. And so it's just really interesting to look at that feedback from the community, especially in some of those areas where, you know, we've had those discussions about issues of DEI and, you know, said, well, we're not doing any of those things in our district, yet somehow, you know, 32% of our families or respondents think that we're doing too much of it. So I don't know, maybe there is some value in this. I'm definitely going to think further about this.
A couple follow-up thoughts. So this point was made previously, but it's worth making again. It's great that it is statistically relevant. No one's questioning that. That's fantastic. But at most, I think it was 500 plus a parent balloon, maybe close to 1,000 recipients took the survey, whereas the 6 of us board members represent, I want to say, I tried to do some rough math, over 20,000 votes total. So the representation that the 6 of us bring to the district dwarfs by a factor of 20 or more the amount of people that are responding to this survey. So I think it is unfair, to put it mildly, to put a heavy emphasis on 500 to 1,000 responses and then downplay the significance of the people who actually sent us here in the first place. So worth bringing that up again. The reason I mention that, and gonna go back to one of those topics I brought up, is because we asked the community if they wanted to do a referendum, you know, have a tax increase to fund, you know, whatever it is that we need to in the district. The survey suggested that the community was about evenly split. It was a toss-up. Maybe they'd support it, maybe they wouldn't. It just so happens that the board has been accused many times of also being split, and in certain ways we are. That's why we have co-chairs as opposed to just a chair. So I will just put this out there again. It's worth mentioning. I will happily support a referendum if this board chooses to do what is called zero-based budgeting. And the reason that I would support a referendum if we did that is because it would bring the entire board together to find only those items that a majority of this board agrees upon to remain in the district. If that occurs, then I think that this board would be truly representing the community members that voted us here in the first place. So I'm just throwing that out there. Even with the community being evenly split, I would happily support a referendum if we did zero-based budgeting to make sure that the voters are represented by the board members they sent to this board. Second thing, and this is perhaps a critique of this board, if we want to do less DEI, as the survey says, and if we're told that the survey is valuable, and as Superintendent McIntyre pointed out, when I asked what did we do about the divisive stuff in the district, he said, well, we follow board direction. That's right. I wouldn't expect anything else. But then I guess my question goes to the board. If the administration follows board direction and the board got clear feedback from the Morris Leatherman survey that they want less divisive stuff in the district, and then we didn't do anything with that, why then would we go back to the district or the community and ask the same questions again and tout the fact that they're statistically relevant and then do nothing with the feedback we get or not act on it? Director DeShane?
So just a few follow-ups to those comments. It's correct that overall, on that survey last time, 32% said that it was too much DE&I. It's also true that 65% said that DEI was about right or too little. So I think that's a important piece of the math of this survey that we should consider. And to Superintendent McIntyre's point, we have taken multiple discussions about all kinds of topics over the last year and a half with this current board. And the district has made changes at the board's direction. When we've been able to get a board majority to say, this is the direction we should go, that is what has happened. So that accounts for your comment about the weight of the board members in these discussions. That's exactly what's happening at every single one of these meetings, in all of the discussions. And I also want to just counter, we are not sitting up here just representing the community that voted for us. We represent the entire community, not just those folks that were able to come out and vote. And we have to remember that. This survey gives us access to information that represents all of those stakeholders, not just those that were able to come out and vote on election day. I think, the concept of a referendum was not something that a majority of this current board agreed to pursue with the budget cuts that we were facing. That's accurate. The community is also divided on whether or not they could afford to support the district with an increased tax burden. We know that that's a difficult spot that people are in right now. Communities like city governments, county governments, they are able to set their budgets and then set their tax burden on their folks without asking their permission. And they've done that. There's been double-digit increases on our taxpayers because of the cities and counties. That's just a reality with inflation. We're hearing about it from our facilities maintenance folks. It's hitting everybody, and school districts are funded the way that we're funded. And one of the things that we have to do as an additional burden is ask our taxpayers to increase our funding if they're willing to do that. I think that question is an important one to understand. I said at the beginning, right? I think this survey is very important. I think it's relevant to us to have that information. And I think it's important to continue the trend lines so that we can see over time which way is our community heading on these different topics. The actions that we've taken based on that information, to me, are evident. We're continuing to discuss these topics, meeting after meeting. We're continuing to provide board majority direction to the district and make the changes that we can make.
So, as the saying goes, there are lies, I'll edit it, there are lies, darn lies, and statistics. And in the way you just described it, you said, I think it was 65% or so said DEI was just right or not enough. If you choose to skew that in the other direction and take the people in the middle who say it's just right or too much, that number would be higher than what you said. So you can kind of make statistics say whatever you would like. As for the representation of the board members, I actually was, in my math, I was trying to include the people that voted for and against all the board members. That's why it got up above the 20,000 number. Again, I don't have the exact number, but I believe it's at least higher than 20,000 for all of us. And it's true, we do represent everyone, but when you have over 20,000 people voting for the 6 of us here, and we're going to defer to 500 to 1,000, say, to theoretically represent the other actual majority of people that didn't vote in the elections, that doesn't add up. Again, there are lies, darn lies, and statistics. That doesn't really make sense. It certainly does represent in a statistically relevant way the district, but so do the elections. And I think it's kind of silly to downplay elections with 20,000 plus votes for a survey with 900 votes. Now, again, Do I think the survey is useless? No. I think we did get valuable information from it. But the question isn't, should we do a survey in a vacuum? The question is, should we pay $30,000 for a survey when we know we're going to be cutting a lot of, well, teachers, unfortunately, and other things as well, because we're facing big budget deficits as a result of what the state's doing. So I personally would like to see the board act on the previous results of the survey more before we move forward and do another survey. So at this time, for whatever it's worth, I'm not personally in favor of doing it again until we actually get good use out of the survey that we did take, and I don't think that's happened. And at any point, any board member can voluntarily provide direction to the district to lessen DEI, for example, which it seems is what the public largely wanted. So that's where I'm at on the survey.
My recommendation to the board is, you have 2 board members not here tonight, so through the co-chairs, we can poll, and if there's a majority of you that want to move forward, then we do it. We just need to make a decision soon. Otherwise, we'll be out of time and it won't be useful to you. So that would be my recommendation, is to poll. Each of you can weigh in with the co-chairs and follow up with me on whether to move forward or not.
Director Langenfeld?
Thank you. As we think forward, I think that there are some important questions that really make sense for answering. So then the question is, do they ever do a subset of questions from a previous?
Do they ever do a subset of, many of the questions are the same year over year, is that what you're asking?
Right. So then what I'm saying is there are certain things that right now would be very helpful to know as we go to phase 3. So my question is, is it possible to reduce the cost by reducing the number of questions we ask? Because I think there are some vitally important questions. And I go back to the fact that the data piece, and this is a reflection backwards, forwards. I know that having used the Leatherman data over years for referendums and things, it's been fairly accurate and aligns with what has occurred in the movement of, the survey tells us important information about referendums. It seems to, I don't know that I recall that it doesn't align. Would that be an accurate statement? Okay. So that significance, I go back to, well, anyway, okay, thank you.
A few comments. One of your next agenda items, you'll talk about what Superintendent McIntyre talked about, the Phase 3 adjustments. So you'll be reviewing the Phase 1 and Phase 2 adjustments. One of the cuts that was made was surveys. So the board already approved a reduction in surveys, $40,000 through Jana's department for the parent attitude and satisfaction survey. So this community survey is like our one pass now at getting and collecting that type of data. Secondly, this has been going on for about 23 years in the school district. And past boards have found value in it, whether or not that's changed, but it's also informed the district scorecard, which is your main performance measurement tool. And also administrator performance is graded based on some of the scores in these that are collected through the community survey. So it's used kind of in a day in, day out, try to improve the district, have the best possible school district. One of the key performance measures that we look at is the level of excellence in the district. And Anoka-Hennepin is compared to other districts and how it's doing as far as perception. And I think, at the macro level, that 5,000-foot level is, how do we become the best school district we can be? How do we compete with other school districts, with other schools in our area to provide the value and provide high-quality services? So some years, it provides a gold mine of data and great information for the board. Other years, it may not provide the same level, the harvest of what you might need to do, but doing it each year, it's kind of a discipline that leads to excellence for the long term. And that's the way it's measured in Anoka-Hennepin is through this survey. So if at some point the board would likely want some way to measure how well the district is doing on all these measures, and this is the way that it's done here in our district and has been for a couple of decades. So I just wanted to throw that perception out there. It is budgeted currently. So, and we've made budget reductions in the area of community surveys. So I just wanted to throw that out on the table for board consideration.
I have a thought based on what you said. So I appreciate the explanation as to what we use it for, the scorecard, for example. I do know that it's been a long-standing survey. I actually do find value in it, like I was saying. I voted to do it last year, and we did. The couple considerations, though, are, and I keep going back to this, cost. Everything costs money, and we're going to be cutting a lot of things. So it might seem like just a drop in the bucket, but we need many, many drops in the bucket to kind of get through all of the cuts that we're going to have to do. So this is one. Unfortunately, we had the opportunity to save $68,000 annually on SEL, and we chose not to do that. So that would have been another many, many drops in the bucket going forward, but we chose to pass on that. But the other thing too, so I want to just touch on this, like the metrics of success. My metric of success for the entire district, it comes down to one thing. Can the students that were graduating pass standardized tests indicating that they learn the material they need to learn? And the closest metric we have to that, whether you love it or you hate it, whether it's easy to understand or not, is the MCA test. And to just make a very, very blanket statement on it, it's about 50% of our students in the district cannot pass standardized tests. So what am I saying? As useful as all of these metrics are, and they are useful, we do want the district to be known for things like being an inviting place to come, having great programs, things like that. The bottom line of any district is, are we teaching students the material they need to learn? And so that's the metric I use. And as much as I want to keep all of those things as well, I don't want those to become the primary metric or to distract from what I think is the primary metric, which is, are we educating students well? So I have my metric. That's what I want to go by. I don't think the Morris-Leatherman survey really speaks to that at all. I've even offered to the board at least a couple of times now because I know the MCA test is not required for graduation, to put some kind of a test in place made by an external vendor, external source, to just check, can our students pass state standards? Are they learning the material they need to be learning? Because concerns have been brought up around the MCA tests, and rightly so. I still think it's a good test, but it is somewhat confusing to understand. But if you don't trust the MCA test, what do you trust? And right now the answer seems to be we don't trust anything, but we're not going to put anything in place. And my big concern about the Morris-Leatherman survey then is, rather than just acknowledging that, addressing it, and putting a metric in place we can all stand on and trust and point to, we use these kind of side metrics, which still important. It's not the foundation of why a public school exists in the first place, which is to educate students. So I want to keep the focus on that. I think the metrics are important, but that's the one I really want to drive home. So.
There are questions in the survey that do ask parents to rate the value of the students' learning needs are met. So there are some questions that are, observational that are responded to. It isn't necessarily the data from the MCA test directly, but it would be their answer to that question is, are your students' learning needs being met? There might be, does the district have a wide variety of programs to meet your students' needs? Not directly to your concern, but also can provide value that can inform your decisions on whether the staff's doing a good job of meeting the needs of students.
Any other thoughts or comments from board members? Does not appear so. Thank you guys very much for the discussion. So our next agenda item is item 4F, the board calendar review. I'm going to hand it over to Corey McIntyre, Superintendent.
Actually, Phase 3 budget planning.
Oh, sorry, I totally jumped by that one. Our next agenda item, we're going to go back a step, is item 4E, Phase 3 budget reductions and realignments process planning. Sorry about that. Welcome, Michelle Vargas, Chief Financial Officer.
And I'll take the lead on this. Michelle's is here to help answer some questions. But really, the point tonight is at a very high level, just to get a board thinking a little bit about what's coming here in the next few weeks. Tonight is not the night to get into details, but just to begin to set the stage for Phase 3. Board members, as you think back to phase 2 and phase 1, there was an overall process and timeline, right? So we wanted to begin the conversation around process and timeline primarily. Again, we won't be discussing any specific areas or specific items being considered for reduction because we've not started that process. And I'd be remiss, I know Michelle wants me to stress this, and it's very important that we have a lot of work to do before we can even get to phase 3 process. We have end of year to finish this year. We are still finalizing our staffing on those restricted fund areas. We still have final June payroll and the new time tracking implementation that we've been sharing with you about. This is a big, heavy operational change and lift. We're still working through insurance enrollments for next year. We have, we're still waiting on the legislature. I think they're still going. Right now, they might go all night. So what is the final, we have a sense, but what's the final legislative impact once they finalize all the bills that are being up for approval tonight? I think they got to be done by 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. So also just the implementation of phase 2 cuts. I want to really stress, and we've heard us talk about this, but we haven't even started those yet. That starts July 1st. So the onboarding of a lot of new people into the organization that will need to get up to speed on our work. So that's a focus area and a capacity development piece we have to do, along with just the simple capacity of our finance team. We are a lean but mighty team. And so a lot of those things have to happen before we can get to phase 3, along with the passage, hopefully, of our budget for next year. So the board acted on those budget cuts last November. That is for next year, and you finalize that at the June 23rd board meeting. So all those things are still a part of that process. That is a heavy lift as I look at Michelle and our team here in June. So the phase 3 discussion is really more of into July and August and our planning ahead, but just to get our, be aware of that timeline to come. And it would need to mirror the phase 2 timeline. If we start that this summer, I'm recommending that you make a decision on those things in November, knowing that we have to do staffing for the following year, starting in January. With a short month in December, it's wise to not leave that decision to December if you can avoid that. So that the timeline is very similar in the sense that we would be likely bring you a recommendation or a set of recommendations in September. We'll start that process in the summer, begin to be collecting information, collecting input from various stakeholders, and primarily internally here, and then bring a first set of recommendations to the board for review and adjustment and direction on that. And then in October, that's the perfect time to be asking our community for feedback like we did last time, so that you could really get a revised, once we've heard from the community meetings and any of the survey feedbacks we get, making any adjustments to the recommendations in October. So by that end of October meeting, we've dialed that in even more. And then you got another month for feedback along the way from the community, from the public, for your final decision in November. So there's a lot of variables at play when we think of the things that come into that process that drive the building of those recommendations. If you remember last time, we kind of had 3 options. It was, make all the reductions now. The second one was do some district level central cuts with a referendum, or do them without a referendum, and the board, went that direction. We think our target's somewhere close to 16 million, maybe a little less, if the legislature does land on where we think they're going to land tonight or in the next few days. So we're still looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 16 million for that target. So really my goal tonight was, and we'll have to follow up with the other board members who weren't here, but just getting some preliminary feedback on that process. What things are important to you as a board that we replicate and do again? What might be some things that you'd like to see change in that process that we can improve on? We're always trying to do better. So, and I sometimes think of it as what are the desired results? So the what, And what are the unacceptable things that you aren't willing to do? For example, one might be for a lot of school districts, and you wrestled with it last time, not go below a certain fund balance. That's an unacceptable thing to do in your mind as a board. Or there might be certain things that are off limits, like we're not going to violate any particular state or federal laws in doing this. That's another low-hanging fruit example of what not to do. So it's kind of a open-ended, trying to gather some early feedback from the board and begin to set the stage for what's coming in the summer as we move into the fall, knowing that we still got this year to wrap up and a lot of things to get done before we're really able to begin to take that on full steam ahead. So with that, I'll kind of turn it back for board member feedback and just looking for those high-level things today. Michelle's here to answer any questions.
Any thoughts? Director DeShane?
Thank you. I just want to put out, first of all, I think I valued and would like to see us do again the community meetings in all of our cluster areas. I know at some point there was early discussions of, maybe 2 schools or 3 and doing those community meetings. And then we talked as a board and really valued having an opportunity for folks to come in their cluster to discuss and engage with us and the team about their ideas, their concerns. I valued that. I would like to see us do it that way again. So I'll just throw that out there as part of the process. I think that was one thing that, I know that takes planning and time to get those calendared and organized, so.
Director Langenfeld?
This afternoon, I listened and reviewed a MSBA budget process thinking framework of kind of what the important pieces. Obviously, first and foremost are the assumptions that are being made, and Michelle has laid those out for us based on what dollars we have and so forth. But I look at it, and I think one of the important pieces for me personally is making sure that we keep students at the center of what is, and it's a philosophy, but it's keeping students at the center so that whatever decisions we make, whether the process itself be zero-based budgeting, whatever. So keeping students at the center. I also look at our strategic priorities and making sure that we have support so that the resources are in place, whatever they might be for the strategic priorities as well. And I think that the other piece that obviously several of us, and I know that he's not here right now, but Director Simon has talked about innovative practices that perhaps can leverage, and even piloting kinds of things within that framework, just in terms of that. But I think one of the things, to your point, Superintendent McIntyre, that I would like to see and understand more of is to ensure that the budget or committee or whoever it is includes principal voice. I think if we are going to expect our principals to deliver and make sure that their schools are safe, and also that academic excellence is the priority of that school, that there needs to be a voice in not only can they identify any cost savings, that's the other piece of the story, but can they, where do they fit in this conversation in terms of bringing forward? And I know that there were conversations with principal voice the last time, but I just want to be sure. And then finally, the other piece that comes to mind is then at the end of the day, as we look to a zero-based budget, knowing where all the buckets are to begin with, and then going from there to look at the needs that, schools are different and what resources do they need. And we've had those conversations before as well. So again, strategic priorities, inclusive voices at the table, and looking for making sure that students are always at the center.
Director Hoekman?
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's number one priority, putting those students at the center. We've got to deliver on our mission, which is educating the students of Anoka-Hennepin. And as we look forward to recommendations in budget cutting in this Phase 3 challenging time that we're looking towards, and thinking about principals and other stakeholders being able to have a voice, I think that's so very important. What we learned from the last process, it was suggested we should cut this and this. And once those things were on the table, then people with information were able to come forward and say this, whether it was community members or people within the district, teachers and administrators were able to say, actually, that thing is really, really important. So hearing those things is important to us so that we can make wise decisions in this very challenging time. This is why I think it would make the most sense to say, these are the things that must be in place. Let's start here with these foundational pieces and then add back the things that we can, things that are presented as being really important. So just pulling all of it back, starting with the most basic fundamental needs that our students have, and then building forward from there, I think would be a great process.
I would add to that, that if we were to do it that way, I believe you're describing zero-based budgeting, right? Kind of just, so the idea behind it is you have clearly defined buckets or categories of things like Director Langenfeld mentioned. And then you kind of go through everything one by one. You start with a kind of a bare foundation and add back in the pieces that are the most critical. So the obvious ones would be like things like facility, food service staff, teachers, like the things that you must have to operate, school on a day-to-day basis. And then start with the foundational pieces and continue to add things back in until you essentially run out of money. The benefit of doing it this way is twofold. Number one, if we were to engage in that process, the board that is, you would have a budget cut process that represents the entire community rather than just part of the community. And then number two, I'm going to keep saying this because it's worthwhile, if we do it that way, I will happily support a referendum. So then hopefully we can go down that avenue and get more funds for the district that are going to be much needed. So I'm actually in favor of a referendum, provided we do the budget cuts the correct way, the way that represents the whole board and thus the whole community. So I just want to keep throwing that out there because that is the path forward for me. I hope the board can get behind that. Any other thoughts or comments from board members? Otherwise,
Maybe I'll just, since the opportunity's here, ask Michelle if you have any comments or offerings?
Been looking at this from a zero-based budgeting approach, and basically kind of how we set that up. I think it will be somewhat of a hybrid approach, just for the fact of the time that we'll have and a $700 million budget. There are certain items, like you said, there are restricted, so we'll be able to kind of, what's in the restricted, set that all up for you from that standpoint. But working on a model and trying to pull together how we do this, including principles and all of that. If you look at it from a zero-based budgeting approach, we, like I said, you're looking at about a $670 million budget. That's about 100 cost centers when you look at all the sites and then the departments and everything. So it's a very large process. So there will have to be some planning for that.
just to throw out there, I wouldn't suspect or expect the board to go through like the minutia of all those details. We'd focus on the high level like buckets type of thing, so.
And that's when I say when you look at restricted funding and all of that. I did a similar presentation with the Anoka-Hennepin Parent Alliance, kind of showing the different items and the restrictions. So building off of that model and then bringing it down to sites and departments and just being able to show how we build it back up to what we did. We did something similar several years ago, more centrally. when I first started in this position, just for the departments centrally to meet together. Michelle was a part of that, I believe, with Denny Carlson, to explain to each other, the departments, what you spent your budget on. So it's something that we've done centrally, but not necessarily with all the buildings. So I think that's what we're looking at and trying to build. We have staffing models, we have different things that they're set on, so it's going back and looking at those and bringing in principals and department managers and that, from that standpoint, and reassessing. So that's, I mean, we're looking at it. It's very clear that that's the way that, the route that you want to go, and starting to pull the data together. I think just, as Corey mentioned, we're finishing 25. We're starting to get all of the staffing in for 26, and then these are cuts for 27. So it's a matter of getting all of that together so that we have accurate data for you. And once, funding, where we're at, the hard part will be closing the books and having completely, where we finished fiscal year 25. And that's just going to be part of all of that process to get that done, because it just takes time to close the books and get ready for the audit. So that is the plan, and to bring big buckets like that, but it's still going to be little buckets, because we're going to be working with the principals, and each one of them has their own cost center, their building, and they're all different, as Michelle, Dr. Langenfeld mentioned. They're all different sizes, different makeups, that type of stuff. So from that standpoint, that's what we're looking at, and again, hoping to bring something. It would be back in September, so it really gives us July and August to work on it.
Superintendent?
Well, I was just going to add to that for the board members. So when the finance team was looking into this, trying to figure, like, how do we carve a path forward for this approach? In the private sector, when you look at $700 million companies that have over 100 cost centers, the estimated timeline to reset this process is about 14 months, which we don't have, right? So that's when we hear kind of a modified, for two reasons. We don't have that kind of time, and school finance and school funding is different, so the way it's structured. So we think we can get there in a modified sense, in an expedited timeline, because of the way school district budgets are allocated and funded through the state and things like that. So we're in that process of figuring out the concept. I think a couple of you mentioned, like, start here, then stack on top of that with what the basic needs are. Mm-hmm. We can do that. With what the realities are of a school district versus a company that's not in the public sector. So there's some things we've been peeling back already. I've been careful, because as you heard, they're still trying to get this year done. And we got to get next year's budget in place before we start tackling FY27.
I think Director Huffman was first.
Yeah, thank you for that. Clearly, school finance is a really challenging area, and all the requirements and restricted funds and things are dizzying, to say the least, to think of all the things that we need to do according to state statute and federal requirements to ensure that we're providing the services our students need. With that said, it's also, in such a challenging environment, the easiest thing to do to say, we'll just raise class sizes. We'll just take this easy place, because there is no limit on that. There's no restriction written in law. And so hopefully we don't fall into that trap, because that's the place where our students are served. I mean, we just heard from the special education team that was in here, and how it's so important and necessary to have the least restrictive environment where all students are in the classroom, and we have to keep those ratios low so that we can deliver the services that our students need. So it is a lot of work, and I appreciate what you've done already and what we are headed into, and hopefully we can find some good solutions.
Director Langenfeld?
As I was thinking about, we have 40 schools, correct? Just roughly?
Roughly 40 schools, yep.
Yeah. And to come up even with 16 million would be 4 FTE, roughly, a little more per school, correct? About.
Mm-hmm. 100,000 a PM.
So when you start thinking about the perspective of that, for me, when I think of the zero-based, it goes right back to, I think, Linda, you said that, what does every school need to have and to begin with? And you go to your classroom and we have ranges already, and that's the staffing. I'm thinking about my former world where I was handed my staffing. And it usually started with the number of sections that I had, and we'd look, with the scheduler, and we'd look at that. And I was also part of a committee when we cut, because of the referendum failing, 100 teachers in that group at the middle level. Schedulers need to be part of this conversation, but because that goes back to if we're going to maintain the class ratios currently, what does that look like? And then what does that do to each staffing in the buildings? I think the piece that I keep going back to that we don't know yet, or the assumptions are around the comp ed piece and some of those pieces that, really can impact what additional money we are going to get, right, in terms of the budget.
Are you asking if we're going to maintain what we have when you say comp ed?
Well, I'm just looking at where the legislature is at, and are we going to maintain it? Are we going to lose? At one point, we were going to lose bigly, as they say, we're going to lose big. So.
Yeah, and I'm hopeful, it looks like it's not going to be that scenario.
Correct.
So we worked hard to make sure that
Yeah.
we've done our part to try to
and
protect that.
that's the last I looked at.
Right.
At least in the short term, right?
As of right now, yeah, if it goes based on the agreement, we maintain it, and there's a
Right.
task force to look at it. We have a fund balance that would get us through 27.
Right.
So we thought either way, that we'd be okay. So I think our comp ed at this point is okay.
We're okay. Okay.
And we'll look at, as a restricted funding source, it's a restricted funding source, it's a supplemental, it needs to be supplemental positions, but there's other positions, and we'll look at that and bring that as part of the zero-based budgeting. What are we currently funding?
Right.
Is there flexibility, and how do we do that? We currently have flexibility with it just because of the pilot program and the language that's still in statute. If that were to go away, we wouldn't have as much flexibility as we do now. And that's just some of the information that we'll bring to you and shed light on what's restricted, what do we do with it, and here are options that, as we look at it.
Superintendent?
So this is just the beginning. We'll continue to, ask for feedback, board members, as we move forward. This is just getting it on your radar as we're wrapping up this year, and we start thinking ahead. It's a bit of a lead into the calendar, the last agenda item too, so maybe I'll just pause there, and unless there's more comments,
Director DeShane?
Sorry, I couldn't get my flag up quickly enough before you. I just think a couple things have to be acknowledged. One, school finance and budgeting is incredibly complex, and in the simplest of ways that we're trying to ask for it to be done at this table, I appreciate the attempts and the willingness of our administration to work towards that ask. But I think it's important for us to acknowledge that ask is really oversimplified and not reflective of the realities of how school finance and budgeting works. So thank you, Michelle, for your willingness to work with the board and try to get something that is as close as possible to what folks are asking for. But I want people to know that it is not that simple. It does not work that way. And it will be a challenging discussion if we think that it can. We don't run a one-room schoolhouse where we can say, okay, we gotta have the building and we gotta have the one teacher. Like, we have 42 buildings, schools. It is much more complex than that, and I just want to acknowledge that. Secondly, I think the comment about trying to just take the easy way out and raise class sizes, I don't think anybody wants that as an option. And in fact, this board didn't want that as an option when we decided to do the phased cutting, right? The initial cuts were in the administration office. The second cuts were all in the central office to avoid cuts into the classroom so that we could take from places that didn't impact students. And we did that knowing that there was a chance, a likely chance, that teachers and staff in the buildings that would impact students would be this next part of it, because that's over 80% of our budget. And where we're talking about small drops of money and trying to collect all that, that is accurate and true, and we've been doing that. You heard from our data department that they've cut surveys, we've done other changes and made reductions. But 80+% of our budget is in the people that work in the buildings with our students. There's just no math equation that works for us to move forward without considering that, as hard and as difficult as that is to do. Nobody wants that. I think that's why the referendum option was put out at the very beginning. And some of us wanted to take that option, right, and not decide for our community. We wanted to say to our community, what do you think? They could tell us no, certainly, on a referendum. And they've done that in the past. We've heard this example. That can happen. But, you know, I think that it's a great attempt by our administration to work within the asks of some of our board members for this zero-based budget concept, so that hopefully we can get to a place where we can talk again about referendum and going to the community and asking, what would you support? Because inflation is real, costs are continuing to rise. If we want to have excellent schools with excellent results academically for our students, we need more money to do that. That's just the simple fact. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Director Hoekman?
Yeah, we just had a discussion about the Leatherman survey, Morris Leatherman survey, and 29% of the residents asked at that time said they won't support any tax increases for the schools. And the support, the value that they're seeing in our schools is also dropping, according to that survey, from 74 to 65%. So it's asking the community to add dollars to the school district doesn't seem like a reasonable solution to this problem. We have to work hard. We've been elected to these positions to work with the $670 million budget in order to make those tough decisions that protect our students without overtaxing our public.
So two thoughts as a follow-up to what you're saying, Casey. The first one is there's no reason that this board had to wait as long as we did to have these budget discussions. It's just kind of the process that's been in place since, I don't know, ever. And we've just kept going with it. We could have had these discussions months ago, could have given ourselves more time. Unfortunately, by leaving it to the end like this, it kind of just, to a large extent, cuts the board out of the process, or it makes it so we don't really have a choice, which is a different way of saying the same thing. So there's a thought. We can change that going forward. The second thing is, I'll just ask point blank, are board members interested in doing zero-based budgeting, like as a board? And practically what that means, I'll just spell it out for you. The board, all 6 of us, or I guess it'd have to be an open meeting for that, and Michelle, or whoever is needed to accurately define these buckets, would meet, I'm just gonna make something up, say on 3 successive Saturdays straight for as many hours as it takes, maybe 10-hour Saturdays, it'd be grueling. We could go through all the buckets and come up with what we agree on, what we don't agree on. It doesn't have to look like that. I'm just trying to spell it out so you can get a picture in your head. Is that something that the board would be interested in doing? Just yes or no?
Well, I think what's been offered is we'll bring up some modeling for you, so you don't have to put hours and hours into that process with the proper like guidelines and what interests you have in there. I think that's what I heard you say. That's our job, to bring you those things forward as far as from a process standpoint and prioritization standpoint. So I think the first thing is thank you for being appreciative of the fact that it's a big shift and it's a big ask, and I appreciate the grace, and let us take a run at it administratively. Let the experts who know how to do this model it out for you, and then you can give us feedback and we can adjust it from there, as long as it's hitting your priorities on what you want out of the process. So otherwise, I don't know if it's going to be super productive. looks like you're ready to say something, so I'll wrap up.
Probably said.
Director Langenfeld.
I agree. I think that when there's some different definitions of zero-based budgeting, for me, it goes back to what's foundational for every school. We talked about that. And if that means zero-based budgeting, starting with that core piece and then looking at what all the resources and supports are in the schools currently, and what can be adjusted. I think that one of the important things, it goes right back to listening to the people who are running the schools and having those conversations. And it won't possibly look the same for every school. It currently doesn't, and to your point, Michelle. And so I'm not sure we're interested, at least I'm not interested in each line item for each school, but rather I go back to the buckets. What are the buckets that we're spending? How are they being distributed? And when you describe, Michelle, what you just shared in terms of the buckets and what's in there, Michelle Vargas was my hero back in the day when we started getting comp ed dollars, because I could help my principals leverage differently than they had ever been able to do before in terms of the buckets, because we afforded more autonomy in that space than the previous person. So she'd say, and it goes back to, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, here are your options. And so I always appreciated that. And it is very complex, but I'm not sure we're thinking start with 600 and some $1 million, and then we're going to tell you where it's going to go. So maybe my thinking is different, and I'm thinking going right back to a high level. I'd be very interested in seeing where you go, because I know you know what you're doing.
I think we hear the interests of the board and conceptually what you're looking for. So then I believe it's our job to bring that back to you. Your expectations would always be for the administration to use that process to develop the recommendations to bring back to you. You're going to give us feedback and direction on whether to change course, adjustments, all those things. So that, and we'll make sure that we ask the other board members too that aren't here, although this has come up a couple different times, so I don't think it's going to be so dramatically different. And I just got to say it again, we are still ending this year, and the workload of ending one year and getting through the year before we start another one is real, especially with the changes you see us making with the payroll adjustments and things that are systematic changes for us. So I'm always sensitive to the capacity of our team. That's going to get dramatically smaller here in a couple of weeks. So we're going to make sure we don't overpromise and make sure we hit the targets you want to hit and do it in a way that we can deliver on as well. So there'll be more to come on this clearly, but tonight was just to get you thinking ahead. And I know you all have continued feedback and input as we begin to dig into that once we get through year end here at the end of the month.
So, okay, based on what I'm hearing then, correct me if I'm wrong, Director Langenfeld is a no on the zero-based budgeting, Director DeShane is a no.
No, that's not what I said.
Well, all right, well then yes or no, the way I proposed it.
I'm not sure we're asking the question. I'm looking at what is baseline for, if you call a baseline staffing ratios, monitoring, that thing as the groundwork, then that's where I would start. It isn't zero and here's 671 million. This is what every school needs to have to even open the door.
So fair enough, that's totally fine, but what you just described is not what I was requesting. So that means you would be a no for my request, right? We start with a foundation of nothing. All board members come together, we start adding pieces back in until we get to that number.
Yeah,
and then the
no,
stuff
that's-
that didn't have, in this case, it would be a super majority. Those are the things that get cut. But we start at a zero level, like nothing, and then just add stuff back into that. Teachers, facilities, food service staff, paras.
I think we're saying the same thing. It's just that I added right away.
So then you're a yes on my proposal.
Well, I don't know which, I'm not sure if I have to make that decision. We're not voting.
Well, we're not voting on
But
anything.
I am supportive of having a very transparent process with all voices and making sure that we start with baseline and move forward, if that's what you're asking me.
I am, but it's, the board makes that choice, and only the things that the board can find 4 more members on stay, and all the other stuff goes.
That's how that works, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
That's
So-
what I'm talking about with the buckets and things, that we talk about what's in those buckets and where we want to afford autonomy, and are we keeping these positions because our priorities around literacy, and how does that help kids? I'd like to have those discussions, so I think I don't know what.
So to make,
I'm not in favor of having conversations and having that kind of decision-making, so.
so conversations are great, but the question is the board going to be the one making the choice? And to be as crystal clear as possible, to contrast it with how the last budget process went, I'm just going to pick an example. Towards the end, there was a disagreement on teaching coaches, for example. There were not 4 board members that really wanted to keep, certain teaching coach positions, but that was still included in there. So if we had done zero-based budgeting and we couldn't find 4 board members saying yes to the teaching coach positions, those would have been some of the positions let go of. So that's how this would look different from how we did it the last time. So I guess I keep going back to my question. And we're not voting, of course. This is just gauging where board members are at. Are you in favor of doing that, or doing it more similar to how we did it last time?
The last time the recommendations came to us, correct? The last time, I didn't even have job descriptions. I'd probably want job descriptions for all of the different positions, so I'd know exactly what they do, and I'd want to have flexibility and autonomy for principals, so they could have some decision-making within that framework, just as we heard when we were going to cut certain things, and they said, no, this is what that person does. I think it's very concerning if we are going to go to that granularity in certain positions. So I don't know how you want to interpret that.
Well, the level of granularity, there's a limit to what we would even bother to do. I'm not suggesting we pick out every single position in the district, but we define buckets, and then we agree or disagree on the buckets and go from there.
I'd like to talk about the buckets, yeah.
But again, the question is the board going to be the one making that choice, or are we going to send it to so bucket by bucket, we vote for each bucket, can we get 4 board members on this? If not, what do we need to change to get it? Versus Corey and his team bring recommendations for it. That's the key distinction. I sense that you're saying no, I just don't think you're using the word no, so I just want to be crystal clear.
I don't believe I'm saying no.
So then are you saying yes?
Sure, I could be saying yes. I'm interested in following what the superintendent has just offered to start with.
Well,
Okay.
what I would recommend, Chair Arco, and the board is, as Michelle said earlier, we will provide a starting point for a model to bring back to the board and say, here's how this process can look. So it's a beginning framework for this. And the board can give us direction, or is this meeting the intentions that you're wrestling with right now? But we can't get to that till this summer, but come August and September, we'll come back to you with, we've heard your intentions conceptually. Let us figure out a way to do that within our realities and bring that back to the board, and then you're gonna steer us whatever direction the majority of you want to steer us in.
Well-
That would be the first step.
So the first step is fine, but again, the key distinction, which I'm driving at, and I'm just going to keep saying this, is if we were doing it the way I'm describing this time versus last time, the difference is when we had disagreed on those teaching coach positions, yes, they were in your proposal, but no, there weren't 4 board members who wanted to keep it in that proposal. Even though there were 4 more board members that were okay with the large majority of that proposal, that would have been one, let's say, line item or something that, in the absence of 4 votes in favor, it would have been removed. So provided we adopt that philosophy, I'm great with starting with your recommendation and how you define the buckets. But that distinction is what I'm getting at, because that distinction is going to determine if it's the administration that really drives the budget cut process or the board. And I'm trying to get the board to drive the process, not obviously excluding the administration, but it's who's in the driver's seat is really the question. And I keep going back to this. You've correctly pointed out, we're going to have less staff. It's going to be harder. Correct. I agree. That's unfortunate. We also didn't have to wait this long to have these conversations and to do this. We could have begun these discussions immediately after we made the first cuts, and then we would have had a much longer runway to have much more time for board input and community input. And I'm just telling you from my perspective as a board member, it feels like when we get to these positions where we're running out of time, you got to make a choice, and here are your options, you got to pick one of these options. It feels like that was designed to cut the board out of the process. That's just the feeling I get. So unless we agree to do the zero-based budgeting, the way I'm describing it, essentially we're just going to be presented with options, and even if we don't like any of them, it sounds like we're just going to have to pick. So,
Well, I would just offer to the board that the options previously were attempted to be designed to meet the intentions of the board. And the reasons we wait is we don't know what we have to work with. We wait on funding from the state. That has a certain rhythm to it. We have current year work that we're supposed to do. So you could have started weeks ago or months ago, but we wouldn't have the details to get very far. We're still waiting on the legislature now, right? So, and at the same time, you literally almost get a monthly update on the budget. Throughout, multiple times throughout the year, that process has been started. So I don't see our finance team or the administration trying to put the board in a bad position. We are trying to make this decision as easy as possible for you to make, because it's complex. So what I would recommend is, again, we'll work through, we've heard the concept of zero base. It's going to have to be in a modified fashion because it doesn't, to fit it to the world of school finance. But we hear that desire. We'll bring that forward and you'll be able to tell us, yes, you're on the right track. It's got to be a partnership, right? I also, the last two processes, the board has said, you need to bring us an administrative recommendation. So we'll do that. I'm going to try to bring one that you'll support. That's the goal. I'm not trying, we're going to try to do that so we're on the same page. That is, in the end, balancing all the competing priorities. So I think there's more in common here than not. And this is, again, just meant to get it. This is us on our radar as we are ending this year and moving into the summer because it's going to move quick. And you've given, the four of you have given us good feedback tonight, and I think some of the sentiments you have, others will echo. So we'll find ways to continue to get that feedback from Director Audette and Director Simon as well. So it's just the beginning, and we will begin to, I think we have a good sense. We've gotten good feedback for where we need to go from here.
So again, I'm just going to respond to this. You say it's just the beginning. I agree, but it's the beginning with a very tight timeline. Did it have to be that way? We chose to make it that way. You said
But this is the budget process that the board has supported, so we have followed the process. So I am going to push back on if we have somehow not followed the budgeting process. We lay it out in the timeline. We lay that out throughout the year. And so we've followed we have to follow that process from how we're allocated funds, how we do our staffing. There's some routines in there that we have to follow. So I appreciate if you want that sooner, but Michelle's got a finance team of about 5 people running this big place here. And that's about as far as they're already stretched the way it is. So I just, as we've gone through the process, if the board would have said 6 months ago to start this sooner, we maybe would have done that, but we'd have said, well, there's all these other things that we're trying to get done before year end, before the legislative session, all those things that are in play, right? So that's just my point is, it's the beginning of phase 3, but it's all predicated on what we know today, what we'll know even tomorrow morning from the legislative allocations for this district. The 2.74 inflationary increase was on the table to be gone. That'll change our whole scope of where we're going. I don't think that's going to happen, but these are some things that we don't know until the legislature decides how to fund our district, right? So I'm looking at Michelle in case you want to add anything to that. But
Chair Arco, I think I would just add that staffing, 80% of what we do is staffing. And to get to that information, we are still in the process of staffing, and having that granular data for you isn't available yet at this point. And this is for fiscal year 27. So that's why we need a little bit of time to get to that granular data, and in order to get into that, to really have the true data. And I do believe that we are going to bring you what you're asking for. I will tell you the hardest part about this is that it is a huge budget and you have a bunch of budget managers. Even if we were to spend 10 hours a day for those Saturdays, I'm not going to be able to answer all the questions for you because they're not my budgets. I don't make the decisions. I track them and all that. So that would require, you'd need all of our budget managers there from that standpoint. So what I want to lay out for you is to be able to try to pull that data together and not down to the dollar for dollar, but into those buckets and how they budget so that it's not 10 hours for you and 10 hours for us, but you get that data that you want. And that's what I want you to have. When you talk about those coaches, when we talk about comp ed and where they're coded, that's part of the discussion that we'll have. Here is this restricted funding source. Here is how we spend it. Here's what you can do with it, and what are your options. And that's what I want to bring to you at that level. I don't want there to be, when I think about how we budget for schools and their pots that they have, there's just so many intricacies I really want to bring to you so you have that transparent understanding. As somebody who's only really been around school district funding for a year now, I understand it's very complicated, but I want to bring it to you, and I try to bring it to you in the most simplistic fashion, but it's not simplistic. And this is, in order to be that granular, we really need accurate data. And trying to get that, we just need a little bit of time. And again, my plan is to have it at that level that you want to see it. And then you to be able to respond back and ask questions. And then we can go back to the people that are responsible for those budgets to bring you more detail. And that's so that you do get the chance to make those questions and comments and decisions.
So I think you did an excellent job last time, and I believe everything you're saying. Like, I do think you're going to bring forward a recommendation to the best that the administration can based on what the board is asking for. I have no doubt there. I think, like I said last time, an excellent job was done. The thing that I keep driving at, though, is not, are we going to get a good recommendation? I think we are. Is that recommendation going to be parsed through in an appropriate way, not in a super granular way, but in an appropriate way by the board, so that only those things in that recommendation that have a majority of the board will pass, rather than saying, we all agree on 80%, but the other 20%, I'm just making up numbers, well, it just happens to be there anyways, and we're not going to do the 4 board member requirement vote. So that's what happened last time. I was happy with most of the process, displeased with that part of the process. It really comes down to, are we actually going to reflect what the community wants? Which, if we do that, then only those, especially on a split board, only items that have a majority of this board should remain in the district. That's how we reflect the community. The other thing too, is you guys keep pointing out that a lot of the budget is locked in place already. And because 80%, I think the number is said, is staffing. And I agree, I don't have any problem with this. What's interesting to me, though, is if that's the case, then all the more reason to do what I'm asking, because we're just going to discover what you guys are telling us anyways, which is most of it's locked in and we can't really do much anyways. Then by all means, let's take a look. If what you're saying is accurate, then we're going to draw the same conclusion and there's no harm done and we're just going to agree with everyone anyways. And then you'll have me voting for a referendum. So if everything you're saying, if everything all of you are saying is true, it seems like a win-win for you and for everybody to do what I'm requesting. But it really just comes down to, like I said, you can start with a recommendation. We don't have to do a super granular level of looking into the budget, but provided that when the recommendation comes, if any items in that recommendation, let's say whoever, any director says, hey, what about this item in the recommendation? Can we see if there are 4 board members that want to keep this item? And then if we go ahead and take a vote and it turns out there aren't 4, we go ahead and remove that item from the recommendation, but keep the rest of it. If we agree to do that, I will vote for referendum. If not, I'm just telling you how I'm interpreting your actions. That is the district locking out half the board members from participating in the process. I truly do not understand why, when we have a split board, we don't find a bipartisan way to only have those items that this board agrees to have in the district. And this is the most straightforward way to do it. So, yeah, that's where I'm at. I agree with everything you're saying, but I don't see why we wouldn't have that kind of line item discussion when the time comes based on the recommendation. Does anybody else have any other comments or thoughts? Otherwise, we can move on to the final agenda item, or one of the final ones, the board calendar review. All right, well, thank you very much for the discussion and the presentation. Well, no presentation. So our next agenda item is item 4F, the board calendar review. Going to hand it over to Superintendent McIntyre.
Yeah, so I'll be brief, but in your documents, a couple changes here. At every work session, we just take a peek at what's on the horizon. And with this being June, I've begun to draft a new calendar for next year. So what's in there right now is a bit of a skeleton approach with just, we know the things that have to come at certain times of the year for board action and review. So quickly, just to look at the June 23rd meeting, along with the approval of next year's budget, we also have our annual certification of population estimation. We have our, well, as you heard earlier, Greg Cole will be bringing forward the 10-year LTFM plan. We hope to have a legislative recap through our lobbyist Lori Grivna. I would guess that the legislature will be done by then, hopefully, and you'll get to hear the high-level impacts of the actions of the legislature. And then because we're in negotiations now, each month I will at least have a placeholder for labor negotiations update. You're going to get that annual public update at the regular meetings as we're in this cycle of negotiations. Looking out into the July and August meetings, we just have one meeting in July because of the summer schedules that everyone has. So that tends to be a little bit lighter meeting, although this time we are intending to bring forward those learning and achievement UBD sets of work for the courses that we've been discussing. So that's tentatively scheduled for July and August as those get done. We also in July, we do the tax levy, the preliminary tax levy timeline review, well ahead of the final approval that comes to you in December. That is our typical timeline for that. And then every August, we always review our school safety and security updates as we get ready for the school year. What changes to our safety and security planning do we want to review with the board? So that's just kind of a high level of the key items on the agenda coming, and we'll be building out the fall month by month overview of the work sessions and board meetings. We've at least in draft form established that calendar for next year. So those are the highlights unless board members have specific questions.
Any questions from board members? All right, hearing none, we are going to move on to, thank you very much, Superintendent McIntyre, the board correspondence and communication. So members, this is your opportunity to share happenings in your community, report on committee assignments or other items of interest. Does anyone have anything to share? Director DeShane.
Lots of graduation celebrations that many of us were at the past several weeks. And just a huge shout out of gratitude to the communications team, to all of the principals, all the administrators, all of the admin teams that worked to make those go off so seamlessly and be so special for our students and families. It's always a remarkable time of year. It's a very happy and exciting moment for our students and families, and you all do such a nice job of making it special for them, so thank you.
Director Langenfeld.
Just as one more comment on that, a special shout out to all of the speakers. They were extraordinary this year. I think we could archive what each had their own personality and their own story to tell. And I thought it was really, really, really important to have that as well. A lot of good things as we wrapped up the end of the year in our schools too. Had the privilege to go to the Young Authors Conference where I had good conversations with many of our middle school teachers who lifted up that day. We actually had one of Champlain Park's, I know you must know her, Nicole Kronzer, who was one of the authors, who has written a number of books, who has now stepped aside and she's stepped out of the teaching ranks, but she was at Champlain Park for many years as well. And then also just a congratulations to our girls softball team for taking state, and also congratulations to the boys team, both from Champlain Park. The boys won the section champs as well. So a lot of a very good team and parent support going on at those different games as well. So.
Director Hoekman?
Yeah, that was an amazing effort by the staff at Anoka to put on graduation twice.
Yes.
The rainy situation on Monday and then repeating the situation on Tuesday. That was a great effort, and the kids were wonderful. The families were wonderful. It was a great celebration. Just an additional comment that recent legislation and policy changes in Minnesota now permit boys to play on girls' teams. It's no longer a distant or unlikely scenario. It's an everyday reality for girls. We're witnessing this unbelievable reality that's much more than winning titles and awards. It's girls losing the opportunity to even play. Girls are told to sit on the bench, not because of lack of effort, dedication, or talent, but because of limited roster spots that are going to boys. Sports are so important to teach resilience, teamwork, sportsmanship, promote health and well-being. These are the reasons Title IX was enacted, to ensure that girls had equal opportunity to play. Every roster spot, every starting position, every minute in the game matters. We need to protect the integrity of girls' athletics.
I likewise, as all board members did, I got to attend a couple graduation ceremonies, Blaine High School in particular. It was very well put together, so just well done on that. I also did finally make it out to Roosevelt Middle School. So I've made it in this first, I guess, full year of my term on the board. I've made it to all of the schools in my district. So it took me long enough. I should have done it faster. So yeah, and then I would also like to comment, since you guys have brought it up, on the softball win. I mean, I think the public at large everybody has formed their opinions on these things. They're at a point of semantic overload, emotional and mental overload. Everybody's opinions are formed. I have a unique perspective on it because maybe something to add that people haven't considered, because like Director Hoekman pointed out, it's a sad day when girls have their opportunities taken away from them and they're discriminated against. And the federal government does nothing, the state does nothing, the board does nothing. But at the end of the day, the first and the last line of defense for any, child is their father, in my opinion, their parents, but in particular their father. And what baffles me is why so many fathers in the state, in our district and other schools, I guess, just sat on the sidelines and did nothing as their daughters had their opportunities taken away from them. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I get that you have to put your neck out on the line and you have to risk being labeled a big, bad bigot or something, but what's the alternative? Your children are being discriminated against and you do nothing, I guess. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. As a father of 3 daughters, at a minimum, I would protest. At a maximum, I would be there protesting with them. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me then. If there's anything worth fighting for, worth protesting, it would be standing up for your daughters to have their opportunities where they belong. So an interesting take on the outcome of the girls' softball game is one of the more well-known sayings, statements in the Bible that Jesus made was, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world yet lose his soul?" And the principle behind that statement has a surprising applicability here, because, let me just, in that spirit, offer the proper accolades to the Champlain Park High School girls team. Congratulations. You have won the state championship, and in so doing, you have lost your sport.
Excuse me. First of all, what a weird thing for the two of you to bring to this part of our board meeting when we're supposed to be talking about happenings around our district and a topic on which you don't know any of the details behind it. The comments that you're making from this board table right now are those of ignorance, and they are not reflective of the realities. the parents of players on all of our sports teams across all of our districts, schools, are standing up for their kids. They are cheering on their teams, and they are there for each other. What a weird thing for you to choose to speak on at this moment.
So I believe, well, first, Director Langenfeld mentioned it. Director Hoekman mentioned it. I believe the district and the state are possibly facing a lawsuit as a result of it. It's in the headlines. It's big news, so I don't know why it would be inappropriate to mention it.
News,
And
yes, but the facts are nothing. You don't know any of the facts.
Really, I don't know any of the facts.
It doesn't sound like it.
All right, then. Well, I guess you know everything that I'm aware of. Director Langenfeld?
I don't want to diminish the fact that an extraordinary thing happened, and it was Champlain Park's first win at state, and to diminish that success of that team is very disheartening for every woman on that team, because they played extraordinarily well. Their defense was exceptional, and quite frankly, their hitting was exceptional. And being a person who knows the law and supports the law, and the law in Minnesota says that every child has the right to not be discriminated against or bullied, stands in my head. And I support every child in this district and take responsibility to make sure that we follow the law as well. This is a point where I looked at, and I don't want to diminish the women on that team, and they all deserve the respect, and the parents were there and very supportive. So I find this very, very disheartening that we would demoralize a team that has earned this respect and regard from many, many as well, for the incredible game that they played. And quite frankly, all the women who are playing ball deserve a lot of commendation, because they were respectful and they were supportive of one another. When a team is a team and they play together for that many years and have such exceptional camaraderie and support for one another, to have these comments made in regard to one of our teams in Anoka-Hennepin just makes me really, really sad, really sad.
Do you know what makes me really sad? When girls are discriminated against and their sports are taken away from them. That makes me really sad. When multiple other teams lost because they were discriminated against. That makes me very sad. All right. With all of those lovely comments being made. The next item on our agenda is 6, the executive session. This executive session will be closed pursuant to Minnesota Statute 13D.05, Subdivision 3B, for discussion of attorney-client privilege information regarding matters related to female athletes United versus Keith Ellison et al. Oh, speak of the devil. The closed session will be held in room 317, Michael Sullivan Room. I would entertain a motion to move to closed session for the reason just stated.
So moved.
Thank you, Director DeShane. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Director Langenfeld. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, will all those in favor say aye? Aye. Any opposed say nay. With 4 in favor and 0 opposed, we'll move into closed session, and we'll take a 5-minute break. The time is 9:06 p.m.